Hey everyone, Vince here from the Double Podcast. Of course, this is the next episode in the spooky tales for October. This episode, we're going to be talking about our favorite horror memories from different media and stuff that we're currently watching that's horror related and all that stuff. Let's get into the episode, guys. So
I'd like to begin with Werewolf by Night.
Okay.
Fresh out there. Yeah, loved it.
I haven't seen it yet. I thought it was the 8th that it was coming out.
No, it came out at midnight.
Oh, okay.
Michael Giacchino is obviously, he's somebody we can hang around, Vince. Okay? This guy loves the old school. He is very old school, very knows what horror, the origins of horror are, and knows how to give you an entertaining story using those original elements. Okay, and his version of Werewolf by Night, spot on, and his use of Man-Thing, spot on.
See, I'm looking forward to Man-Thing because I love
Man-Thing plays. I will say this without spoiling it for you. Man-Thing plays a really important part through all of this, and it is so worth it. The 50 minutes or so that it runs goes by so smoothly. And the storytelling was nicely paced, and they were able to cover a lot of ground with history and catching things up and establishing a lot of character interrelationships. It was by far one of the best Marvel products I have seen in the past 2 years.
So this is setting up the dark side of the Marvel universe.
It's setting up the
supernatural, yeah,
the paranormal. It's setting up all the darker stuff. And I was looking it up earlier. They talked briefly about having Blade in it, but he said, no, we've got this. Let's run with it. It's going to take the course of one night. We've got these characters. Let's run with that. And it was the right call.
Nice.
It was exactly and they
that's what I'm going to
do
watch
introduce the Bloodstone.
They do. So that was the Bloodstone on the book.
The Bloodstone is so well done, Vince. You're going to love it.
Okay.
I mean, because we were talking before about Jameson's son having possession of it.
Yeah,
this explains the possibility of that. Without introducing Jameson's son, they explain how you're gonna be like, oh, that is entirely possible. So, and you're gonna be able to go because your advanced knowledge of how all those stories work back in the day, you're gonna be able to go, oh, this is a possibility. Oh, this is a possibility. You're going to be able to piece it together, and you're going to be able to run with it.
All right, guys. I'll see y'all later. I'm gonna go ahead and get off this and go.
Well, we'll definitely.
Travis and I sat down and watched it this morning, and he's not a Marvel fan anymore. He's like David. He's ready he jumped ship, and he's just like, fuck it.
I don't think David was ever on the ship. He just kind of rammed it as
no,
a piece of ice.
He was early on.
No, I was absolutely on the ship for at least the first two phases. I love.
We're talking about the MCU. I thought Marvel as a whole, you've
always
seemed to be more DC.
I have nothing against Marvel, right? It was never the heroes and the stories that came up or that I always heard about didn't really draw me in a whole lot. Most of my exposure to it was through the cartoons, and the cartoons always got bad at a certain point. Spider-Man hit the Clone Saga, and it was like, I have no idea what's going on. This is way out there and getting really weird, and why is Mary Jane a Hydro Man clone? I don't understand what's happening. And then X-Men, the third season after Apocalypse got beat and they went into space, then it got really odd. And so it was never something I was drawn to. I've just always been more on the DC side, not to be against Marvel. It's just DC was what I gravitated toward.
So Travis is basically in the same boat. He's checked out a lot of this stuff. He'll watch it just to have knowledge of it because of the whole continuity thing. He sat and watched the whole thing with me. He goes, that is the best product they've put out in 2 years. And I agree.
I got to watch that tonight.
I absolutely love this. And if this is the new format they're going to with the special presentations instead of the 6 or 8 episodes, God bless them. Let them do it. If this is the
I would love to see more of these like one-shot deals.
These are like talking about Nova
one-shot special. Remember, like on the comics, you'd have the regular, you had the annual, and then you had that one shot that was just really a nice punch. And
Yeah.
that
there was a nice little
gives me the
piece.
feel.
Yeah, there was a nice
But in
little
order to
what if
get that,
Easter egg
though,
too.
But in order to get those good one shots, you need to have people that are on there that know how to write nice,
Correct.
tight, clean stories,
Right.
right?
Stories, yes.
And that's what they're
And
doing.
you have all this other stuff where they're giving themselves 3 hours, and it feels like it feels like they didn't have enough time to get whatever it was they were trying to tell in. Like
Right,
some of these
because-
people just don't know how to put this stuff together to make it cohesive and make it make sense. And that's so I'm
No,
I'm,
and
I'm,
and again, they're not telling a story. They're telling a bunch of intermingled pieces of their own lives
Yeah.
stuck on and saying, "Oh, don't you enjoy this? This is how we perceive these people are. This is what we think you want." No, I read comics. I watched the cartoons. I have a good knowledge of them. I don't even need another origin. I just want a good, solid story.
Right.
You know,
And Werewolf by
and-
Night gives you that. And they're saying that this is the new formula they want to go with. Kevin
Good.
Feige came out like a week ago and said, this is what we're considering instead of so many miniseries. And Nova was one of the most notable ones that people have been tossing around. And I'm like, if they do Nova like this, I'm 100% on board.
You can, Colin, you can see that because they did give the Nova Corps at least their kind
Right.
of
And
frontage in with Guardians of the Galaxy. So you
Mhm.
can do that. It's really
Right.
hard to just take a no-name character, stick them in a story and let them go. I don't think Moon Knight would have benefited
Well,
from being shorter.
if you think
I
about
think
it,
it was too short. I think it could have gone 2 more episodes to do a little bit
Absolutely.
more in depth into some of the gods and stuff that they were trying to get us interested in.
right. Oh, I absolutely
Um,
agree with that.
you know,
and so-
But the
I
stuff that they're
actually
talking,
I think that Moon Knight could have worked as it would have left people confused maybe by the end, right? Because the explanations might not have been there. But I think that just because the best episode for me for Moon Knight was the first one, where it was the constant intercutting, him being kind of confused, fading out of reality, right? Not realizing that someone else was in his head. That was
Yeah.
the most intriguing episode of them all because of how
Mhm.
it was shot, the mystery behind it, and all of that. I think that would have been a cool hour-long special to kind of as a intro course, right? Of showing and slowly the realization, you know, that he's not in full control of his body, and you tell that over the course of the story. And then and I mean, it would have been a little bit more difficult because something like Werewolf by Night is a lot easier to do because everybody knows werewolves, right?
Yes.
right.
It's like vampires. You don't need an origin story. You don't need to tell this big extravagant thing. Hey, here's the gods that give him his powers, and this is the acronym of his name and what it means and all this other bullshit. It's a werewolf, guys. You know what a werewolf is. Everyone knows what a werewolf is.
And there's a lot of
Go.
Easter eggs in Werewolf by Night. A
So-
lot of Easter eggs.
Here's the thing I gotta ask though, because it's like, I think like Disney needs to go back to the drawing board on all their TV shows, considering the fact that like
Fair.
other than Mandalorian, you know, Andor is pretty good, but
I love Andor, man. It is
I
just-
haven't watched that
It
yet.
has
I want
brought
to.
me back to Star Wars, where I was disheartened and just Obi-Wan Kenobi just killed me. I was like, I'm done. I told June, my son, I ain't watching another friggin' thing until I see something that proves to me that they're really on the right track. You know, you bring in Thrawn, you bring in Mara Jade, you bring in the Jedi Academy, you show Luke like he was supposed to. Man, I'm going to come back in until you mess that up. But then Andor reminded me of how I felt when I first saw Star Wars. And I was like, okay, I understand some of the things that you're doing. But, you know, when everybody was saying, oh, it's playing off Hispanics, junk, and all this other junk, it takes place half on a junk world, and I said, but that happens in real life. I mean, me and Vince were talking about it. I said, man, we send all of our junk to India and all these other countries, and we run ships on shore, and they come in and just tear it apart like
Scrap
ants,
it.
And that's what this story is about, a planet right there. But there's an underlying story. He's not from that society. There were 2 people who got him and saved him from his own society that the Empire had screwed up. And then we get to see him being introduced to a higher goal through the people who are the forefathers of the rebellion. I was like, man, this is really good storytelling. I wish I didn't know he died. You know, that's the thing that kills me, man. They're doing a story about somebody that we know what his end is going to be.
Remember,
Right.
that
And
was. Oh, go ahead, Colin.
I'm
No,
sorry. That was my one question. Is Andor directly connected to Rogue One?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
This is
Yes,
what
that's
leads
all I
him
need.
to Rogue One.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I need because it's on my watch list. That's all I need because Rogue One is still one to this
Was
day
one of the
my
best Disney
favorite.
ones they did. Yeah.
As far as like one-offs for Star Wars stuff, Rogue One is one of my favorites. Love it start to finish.
Yep.
And if Andor connects directly to it and keeps that same feel, I'm on board.
So
my
what?
my only thing with Andor. Sorry, Vince. Go ahead. You were trying to talk, and then Colin was. You go ahead before I go in.
That's my problem with Rogue One is the fact that they shorthanded the story on the fact that instead of like having these characters survive the situation, you just did another callback to what happened to the Bothans or Return of the Jedi. So it's like anybody who goes and gets the Death Star plans is destined to die, and that was stupid. So you're building up this character that people are going to like a lot, and they know he's just fated to die.
Yeah, but
Well,
they,
but
that was established way back though.
You know, this is the
This is said.
well,
sorry,
their cost. You know, everybody. It's like watching a movie where all the heroes survive, or watching a movie where all the heroes die. You're like, man, at least one or two people should have been able to make it out of this. Well, if you have a movie where everybody survives, you're like, wow, there was really no cost there. Didn't feel like there were any danger. When you lose somebody, it adds that weight to it. It's like when we were working with the comic, we realized, you know, these guys are doing something that could lead to their death and is going to affect everything. And they walk away unscathed. But Mark was like, we need to kill somebody. I said, well, are we going to kill one of your characters? He goes, no, I was thinking one of yours. I said, And I was like, you know, Mark, when you think about it, we've already done that because somebody does, and I don't want to give it away because eventually I hope to finish it. Mm-hmm. But there is a character who pays a heavy price for it. Do they die? That was left open.
Well, I want to add one more thing too, before David goes. Is the original person who got the Death Star plans did survive, and he became one of Luke's greatest apprentices, and then became a Jedi Knight and a Jedi Master, and that's Kyle Katarn.
Okay, yeah,
because he was the original person, and he didn't die. He went in there as a rogue operative into an Imperial base, got the Death Star plans, and was able to transmit it over to Leia's ship as they were heading to Alderaan with the plans. So that's where I'm like,
see, that even was a redo because if you go back to the original Star Wars, the original before it was New Hope, man, I watched it when it was just the Star Wars, not this New Hope crap being attached onto the end of it. They talk about that they tracked her ship and it made one stop, and it was to a planet that they believe they picked up that information. Right. But then, as with what we retconned, things are like, well, it was only mentioned like in a split second. Nobody's going to remember that. We'll just come up with something else to make it a little bit more exciting.
But remember, Dark Forces, he did go to that planet that was mentioned there.
But like I said, Dark Forces was after the fact. You know, it's one thing that when you tell one story and it's a completed story, there's no way to go and you try to go back and fit something in between there. It doesn't work as well. But when you're doing this long-ended open story, there are ways that you can start pigeonholing things in to expand on the story, which is what Lucas was doing when he worked with other writers and other creators. Mm-hmm. Lucas still had to maintain that control. And that's one thing I think you have to have when you're doing these projects like this. You can't have too many chiefs. If you have, or too many chefs, ruin the stew. You know, that's an old saying where everybody keeps wanting to add their stuff in. Well, without somebody to control it and direct it and have an overall vision for it and be your person who is your gatekeeper of continuity, that you end up with stuff that's just all over the place and you can't follow it anymore. And then you end up chasing different fan bases, trying to make them all happy. Tell your own story, do it in a good, complete way. You know, you don't have to, in any story you're doing, tie up all your loose ends, because life doesn't get to tie up all of our loose ends. But you want to close out some of your plots before you add in new ones, because then you never go back and try to complete what you've already done, because you're moving on constantly.
Right.
Then you've just got lost, where it's a new random mystery box every episode.
Every episode, yeah.
And then you get to the final season, you're like, holy shit, we've got a lot of threads we need to clear up, guys.
Well, yeah, and then you got
They're
the
doing
writer's
it,
strike.
What did they do? Oh, you know
They're in
what?
purgatory, don't worry about it.
Grab the spaghetti. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the end. It's the perfect ending. Just a pile of spaghetti that makes no sense.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I mean, for Andor, like I really enjoyed the first 3 episodes. Watching the 4th episode, there's people were complaining about the first 3, saying it was going slow, and I like the buildup. But with 4 episodes, and they're still kind of dicking around on getting this plan together, and they're all kind of leery about Andor and spending that. I need something to start moving in this next episode.
Well, see, this is a slow burn, because it's longer than all the other ones.
And
Isn't it 12
fine.
episodes? So they got plenty of time yet. I don't want to go straight to the ending.
That's fine. I don't know. I was a little checked out of this episode somewhat. Like, I was watching it and I kind of noticed myself drifting away. I'm like,
so
okay.
Let me ask you a question. Would you have preferred it to when he came in, they all went, "Oh, hey, Adler, how you doing? Welcome in, buddy." Or would you rather that, I don't trust this guy, I don't know who he is, you just brought him in?
But they already established that they don't trust him, and then we just spent like a whole episode just beating that drum for longer. For a whole episode.
To me, it was more
and maybe
him having to prove himself, which is what you'd want to do. I mean, there's a movie called Hornet's Nest with Rock Hudson, and they were going in to go blow up a dam into Nazi territory, to blow up a dam. It was actually an occupied area, and all his soldiers got killed. So there's all these parentless children running around, and he decides, you know what? I have an army, and he trains kids to fight and become his demolitions expert. They're going to get the equipment. They were getting everything he needed so they could blow this dam up. And then this other story within that is that there's a kid who everybody in his family was murdered by the Nazis. So all he wants to do is kill Nazis, even if, right in the middle of your secret operation, a Nazi walks across the street, he's going to run up and shoot him, which could blow the cover of everybody. And Rock Hudson's character ends up with this fatherly feelings for this kid. And in the end, I'm not going to tell the ending, but because of what the kid does, you can't let him loose on society.
Yeah.
And again, it is a slow movie. It's like that through almost all the movie. And then at the end is the big blow up of the dam. And I was like, wow, that was like an hour and 30 minutes of buildup for 30 minutes of excitement, but all of it paid off in the end. So I believe if it all pays off in the end, it's worth attempting. But if you end up at the end going, what the hell? I want my 8 hours worth of life back, then you failed in what you were trying to attempt.
Right. And again, it's maybe I'm just my brain is a little oddly wired, because I've been watching Rings of Power, which every episode feels like nothing happens, and then a thing kind of happened, but the setup kind of sucked. So it's like I'm trying to reprogram my head to be like, hey, they're actually taking their time to try and set up relationships and tell this story. So don't hate it, but it's like, I don't know. I'm enjoying it. It was just, this last episode, I kind of noticed myself checking out a little bit of it. So I'm hoping that the next one, maybe there's a little bit more progress. I don't know. We'll see. But on the topic of Nazis, though, since we need to drag this back away from Star Wars,
we need to come back into horror.
I understand that Star Wars is a horror show right now, and it's terrifying. And every time something comes up that has Star Wars attached to it, we all kind of cringe inside.
Pitchforks, torches.
We wonder if the great god Azathoth has finally released his clutches from it, but she hasn't yet. So speaking of Nazis, I finally finished for the first time the entirety of Hellsing Ultimate.
I haven't seen all of it. I've got it on
series. Yeah, the OVA series, not the original anime from back in the 90s.
Yeah, see, I
Man.
watched all of the original, but I found the other one on Hulu, and I was like, whoa, this isn't your dad's Van Helsing.
No. Oh, and if you haven't finished it, then you haven't seen anything yet. Like there's literally a scene where there's like a dirigible that's in flames crashing into a building in the background, while in the foreground a vampire Nazi soldier has a child in its a child, right, a small child in its mouth, holding like a gun and looking around. And yeah, it gets brutal. That show gets so brutal. But man, like you get to the end of it and the twists and turns it takes, how you find out about the secrets that the Major's been hiding the whole time. And man, like I said, I'd never watched all of it. I'd always watched basically right up until Helsing fought, God, what's the name of the character? The lady who had the musket that had the ball that she could control where it went.
Yeah.
Anyways, but I would always get to about her part, and then I would get distracted, go off, watch something else, and I would always forget to come back to it. And then I'd come back to it and watch through it basically up until that part again, and then I'd phase out. And then so I finally just sat down and knocked the whole thing out all the way through. And the first thing that kind of I'm always shocked by is, you know, so much of whenever they show Nazis in a lot of modern showings of things, they tend to censor a lot of it, right? Like you don't really see the swastika anymore. It's like Hydra, right? They got to change the emblem to where,
yeah, and they never once mentioned the Nazis with Hydra. I mean, it's like they represented what Hitler and them were for the MCU. There were no Nazis, it was Hydra. And instead of like in the comic where they were the science division of the Nazis. Yeah.
So it's, you know, I'm so used to that style of storytelling when it comes, hey guys, we're going to tell stories about Nazis, but it's going to be this very specific division of Nazis, like you said, right? The scientific division, this very specific sect of Nazis that had a completely different emblem. The uniform is vaguely familiar, but it's going to be just different enough where we don't got to put, you know, swastikas all over the place. So watching this and just seeing a giant aircraft carrier with a huge bloody swastika, you know, painted on the top of it, and just blatant Nazism running around everywhere, I was like, wow, this is different. And then just watching people get turned into giant bloody red mist all the time from all the nonsense. It was great. It was great for anyone who hasn't for how long it's been. You know, it's only been out for, I don't know, like what, a decade now.
Yeah,
whoever hasn't gone out and seen it, dude, go watch.
You're missing. Go watch it. It's just, I feel the same way about The Keep. As much as I love The Keep, I hate The Keep because I'm a big fan of the novels. But man, it was Michael Mann, right? He was
Michael Mann
as a director
Dream for the soundtrack.
Yeah, Tangerine Dream for the soundtrack. So it was perfect right there. Especially if you're a fan of Manhunter, which was Red Dragon.
You okay, Colin?
But
okay,
it was. I love the visuals of that movie, and then the fact that they showed the different layers of the Nazis. The Gestapo and the SS were totally different than some of the soldiers who were just inscripted into their armies, but didn't believe in them. But were like, okay, you shoot him or I shoot you. That's not much of a choice, is it? You know, okay, well, I believe in mankind, so shoot me. I would have turned around and said, okay, let's go for it. I shoot you, you shoot me, we both go. No, the guy shoots the other person because he's afraid of dying. And that was a metaphor for how the Nazis ruled. And, but I would say if you are a fan of the Van Helsing, you might want to go look at it because it's a vampire story without being a vampire
story.
It's the origin of where vampire came from. And then once you see the movie, I would say pick up the book because the book is fantastic. It's a huge book. It was one of the longer reads too. But
just the cast alone from the movie itself. I mean, you know, Scott Glenn and Ian McKellen. You know,
young Ian McKellen too.
Yeah, very young.
It has a weird monster with glowing red eyes and a mouth. Is that what this is?
he reconstructs his body. The more people he kills and souls he absorbs, he can add more flesh to him. And both of them are part of an ancient race of light and dark, where legends of angels and demons come from. These are elder gods that were at war, and the light beat the elder gods and banished them to different regions on the planet and in space. And then they would have guardians that were, their whole life was to watch over and make sure they stayed entrapped. And if they were released, whatever they were doing, they had to drop. They could have a family, be a businessman, or like the main character from this, be working on a fishing boat, and they have to stop what they're doing and travel to wherever they are to either reseal them or kill them and themselves, whatever it takes to get them back, destroyed or put back where they belong. And that is the backdrop, and it takes place in the Carpathian Mountains, where Dracula and all that stuff comes from. And it is a mountain keep that was built as a castle that inside looks very much like a church.
Yeah.
And there's crosses everywhere, and you're trying to figure out where does all this play in? So, yeah, made of silver. Or they think it's made of silver.
Silver, yeah.
Because the Nazis are like, oh, silver, and they start trying to dig it out, and that's what sets everything up.
Well, because so if we're going to be
It was
talking
like
about
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, silver and gold. Ooh, what is that?
So
and it has the best scene to prove why you should not stick your head in a hole to look and go, ooh, wow, look at all this. Never stick your head in a dark hole.
So if we're going to be talking about vampires, we can go right into another movie, and it's just off the wall, but it was really good. One that Dad loved, and had a naked woman walking in it most of the film, and that was Life Force.
Oh man, that was the greatest film I'd ever seen at the time. I was sitting in a movie theater and I was like, damn, she ain't just walking around. I think that should be how life is. But nobody wants to see me walk around naked.
No.
I don't want to see me walk around naked.
Yeah, that's what you talked about in the last
I had
episode.
to deal with Randy walking around naked once. No, thank you.
But yeah, that was
There's a story there, Colin. But
Yeah,
we'll
there
leave
is
it
a
alone
story there, and we're not
because
going there.
We're not going to go there.
Nope.
My mind just broke. Okay.
Yep. Moving on, Vinny.
Okay.
Go back. We were talking about Life Force.
Patrick
Who was
Stewart's
it?
in it.
Well, but look who directed it. And now that I said that, just as I was about to say his name, it
My
went
brain
off
went
into
out
the
window
ether.
too.
Not Toby Hooper. Was it Toby Hooper? Toby
I
Hooper.
think it is Toby Hooper. I think it was Hooper.
And I was just in love with anything Toby Hooper made, man.
Didn't he eventually play a version of not Capone, Capote?
Toby Hooper? No, because he was a director. He wasn't an actor. The guy who played Truman Capote was the same guy who he was in Murder by Death. He imitated Capote's character in that too.
Toby Hooper, and then Steve Railsback.
And it had the actor who played Porthos from the original, well, not the original, but Three Musketeers with Michael York. He was oh, come on, I hate names. The professor who figured it all out. And I can hear the other character calling him his name because, like, through the last half of the movie, they're trying to talk to each other on the phone or on radio, and he keeps calling out his name, and it's like I'm hearing it, but it's like jumbled up when it comes out.
Well,
of my
it was
mouth.
would have been the actor, Frank Finley, and it would have been Dr. Hans, I think, or
No, it wasn't Dr. Hans.
Was
Dr.
it?
Hans was the chubbier guy.
Okay, was it? Patrick Stewart's character was Dr. Armstrong.
No, his was
By the end.
he's got a almost German or
Yeah, I know you're talking about.
Bukowski.
Yeah, Bukowski. Yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Goulthar.
Kick back.
I'm sorry, the 12-year-old
Bukowski.
giggled.
Bukowski.
But man, it just had so many, and a lot of actors from Hammer films, like we were talking about Hammer. These are older
I think it was
actors.
the last great Hammer film. before they went under. I think that's what sunk them, was that movie, because it was a huge
It was a
Yeah, it was a
bomb at
huge
the
production.
theater. But I got to tell you, just like The Thing and all these movies that I loved when I saw them in the theater, they didn't do real well.
Nope.
You know, and they were just like written off. And then y'all didn't grow up with this, but me and Colin did. And I have a few years on Colin. We had television critics all the time on television, and they could make or break a movie. And if they didn't like you, or they didn't like the director, Siskel and Ebert, but Martin, what was it, Balsam or some, whatever his name was.
And then there was that guy who looked like the Doritos guy.
I know who you're talking about. Big bushy, the mustache. Leonard Maltin? No, Leonard Maltin was the one with the thin mustache.
No,
man, there were so many.
He looks like
I know who he was, and he had like the afro kind of hair.
Yes,
And so you had these guys who would be you come home and you go, oh, they're gonna review it, and then they come across so totally different than what you got out of the film. You're like, did we see the same movie? And then occasionally, like Ebert would, because it wasn't Gene Siskel, it was, who was the skinny one?
That was Siskel. Roger Ebert was
would like a movie, because they both didn't like Aliens at first, and all of a sudden Aliens got popular, and then they kind of did another review of it, and all of a sudden they was like, it's inventive, Ridley Scott really, and I'm like, y'all a bunch of suck ups, before you went one direction and now you're doing another. And then back then you had newspapers, that's what you read. Right. So whenever my dad had the newspaper, I'd yoink out the entertainment section. I'd look for the comic strips, I'd look for the movies, the movie reviews, and anything like that. Who is that?
Gene Shalit.
Thank you.
And I would like, whatever movie they hate is the next movie I'm going to go see. And damn, if I did that, it would be a good movie.
Right.
They didn't even know what to think about Jaws.
No, I remember that
when it first came out.
That's sad. I mean, but you think about these movies, right? These horror movies or sci-fi movies were like groundbreaking as far as like the set pieces, the visual photography. Some of them weren't great, but they were ones that like it took a couple of viewings to like really get the deep meaning behind what the story was.
Yeah, they were ahead of their I always say they were ahead of their time.
Right. But it's because they were genre films, right? It was niche genre films, and because of that, there was always that scummy side to the way that they were viewed and considered. It was like, that's the dime store crap. No, we need the big, epic drama pieces and all that stuff, right? Before the blockbuster became a thing and all that happened, right?
Then we had those,
the way that people thought of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Because you had movies like most of the big ones were westerns or war films, right. Or I think the first real big epic space movie was 2001: A Space Odyssey. It changed how people thought about science fiction films. Up until then, it was either B movies or it was somewhere in between.
From outer space.
Well, and then you go see the Russian version of Solaris, which was first.
Right.
And that movie was like mind blowing. An animation called Phantom Planet, which shocked me as a kid. And I remember that was in theaters the same time 2001: A Space Odyssey was. And one talked about man's adventure into space. The other one was about life evolving on a planet in two different directions. And then what happens when one species goes to war against another because they have to. One treated the other as not so much slaves, but pets because they were small. This was the whole Gulliver's Travel, Lilliput, but done in a space epic with aliens. I was always looking for things that questioned the reality, push the boundaries. I wouldn't call heavy metal pushing any boundaries other than just a few. But I had been weaned on Heavy Metal, the magazine,
Yeah.
And so I knew exactly what I was going to get when I went in the theater. But even it wasn't a hit. Neither Blade Runner wasn't a hit.
Nope.
Highlander wasn't a hit. They didn't become hits until they made it to their way into the midnight movies, and they started getting regularly shown. And then when the theaters were like, because theaters were owned individually, they weren't large corporate entities like they are now. They would go, hey, man, we're making a ton of money. We're sold out every night over the weekend starting Friday. Let's move this to the regular time slot. And they bring it back into theaters. And all of a sudden it had an audience. And as people brought other friends to go see that movie, that's what happened with Blade. Blade stayed in the theaters for a year, and it grew in popularity until by the time it left the theaters, it had already been selling on VHS and DVD, right? I think DVD was around at that
DVD
point.
was much later.
There was
Okay,
much
so it was
later
VHS.
Yeah.
And what other movie? Jaws was in theaters for a long time.
Jurassic Park was in theaters for a long time.
But
Yeah.
see, Jurassic Park was a big tentpole movie. It's where they just throw everything in. It's a big extravaganza.
Oh yeah, I know. But you just think about movies back then in theaters, they would just be there, and then they would just be in rotation at the dollar theaters.
Yeah, like
You know,
Halloween.
yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore now.
They got a couple dollar
Yeah.
theaters up here, man. There's one called the Hollywood down in Mattydale, which is about a half hour from here. And they do a regular rotation of the B movies and the stuff that's going out of circulation and everything. Really,
we have
nice
a
theater.
small town up near Fort Worth, and I can't remember what it's called. But they do big Christmas event. They got a train. They
Talking about Grapevine or
Grapevine,
yeah.
Grapevine, and they have a theater. And during like Halloween, that theater is showing nothing but old school Halloween movies. And when you walk in, it's an old theater. You know, the way they smelled. It's the candy surrounded the counter instead of, you know, being aisles and you walk over to someone. It was just, it brings you this huge nostalgic feeling. And I got to admit, you know, growing up, there was a difference between a mall theater and the smells and the ambiance, and then the movie theaters that were like 2 to 4 screens, and then the big megaplexes, which were 6 or more. And each
Don't
one
forget
had
drive-ins.
and well, drive-ins were a total different thing. You know, man, I can't tell you, hiding a carload of people in a trunk and under a blanket in the back seat on dollar car night. You know, how many people can you
We have a
get?
drive-in theater up here too.
It was funny.
There's one going up to Dallas. Sorry.
That's fine. It's funny. Apparently, they didn't realize what the number in the theater names meant, like AMC 30, Cinemark 18, you know, Cinemark 12. They didn't realize that number is the number of the number of screens in the theater. It just, they said, what? I was like, yeah, y'all didn't know that? I was like, the next time we go to any movie theater, I'm like, look to see the numbers for the screens, and look to see which the highest one is there, and then think about the name of the theater, and you'll realize that's what it is. It's I never realized that people didn't put those two together, right? It's like, I just thought it was common knowledge, but apparently some people aren't aware that, yeah, when you see a movie theater that's like, again, like AMC 12, it's because they have
like AMC
screens.
14. Now, sometimes they'll say AMC something, but it doesn't give a number. But yeah, generally, I mean, like for me, the big theater was Century South 6. It had 6 theaters, 3 on either side, with the concession and everything in the dead center, and you could walk around. I would never have been able to sneak into as many movies if it had been set up like that, because you could just walk the wall until you went through all of them, you know. But yeah, that's, you know, people don't pay attention anymore to things, you know. Wow, is that what that was really about? Yeah, man, I would have never got that. And I was like, how is that possible? You know, Dracula's about a vampire. Titanic's about a boat that sinks. Jeez, come on. Jurassic Park's about dinosaurs.
We're so far removed from some of that stuff nowadays, because like we have like 2 or 3 generations almost that don't know what video rentals are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't know what it was like going into Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or those mom and pop video stores.
Man,
Red's
I
video
was
before it became a remote program.
Going on to vampires again, Near Dark. David just recently watched that. Great. And since you brought up Westerns, it's a very good innuendo to that.
and
All
there
right, you know what?
Or
let's
segue.
think about how many vampire films that came out in that same time frame. There was Near Dark. There was the one
Fright
about
Night.
Fright Night, but Fright Night was its own kind of off in the corner about vampirism. Near
Well, it
Dark
was-
was realistic, down and dirty, old Western vampires that have been around since the Wild West days.
Correct.
But then there was another movie about where the young guy was driving a car to that he'd been paid to transport across to it from one city to
that
another.
was in the, that
Picks
was
up
in,
the hitchhiker girl, and she's being chased by the
that's Forsaken, and that came out
Yeah,
in the
Forsaken.
2000s. You're talking about around the time that Near Dark came out. You're going to talk about Fright Night. You need to talk about Lost Boys. The reason why I bring up Fright Night was actually trying to play on the lore of the actual Dracula novel and keeping it in modern times, plus doing the whole Rear
but
Window kind of thing.
yeah, because Peter Vincent is Von Helsing, except he's an expert who doesn't believe in what he's doing,
Exactly.
whereas it's the opposite of what Von Helsing was.
Correct.
Dandridge was Dracula.
Mhm.
His manservant really couldn't have been Renfield. He was more of your traditional,
He's a guardian. Yeah,
a
he was
guardian who always protected the
was a
vampire, and if they
ghoul.
died, would
Yeah.
bring them back if they had to.
Correct. And
Um,
then you had Lost Boys, of course. Lost Boys is a play on Peter Pan being a vampire.
vampire, yeah.
You
A
had
lot of them were
Vamp,
fairy tales done to horror movies.
right? You had Vamp,
hmm
which is about
You
the
also had
college student.
You had Cronus, which was a Spanish film by
Right.
Del
Del
Toro.
Toro's first.
Right. You had Once Bitten.
Yep.
Yeah, you had Once Bitten, and you had which one was the comedy? One was with
Once
with-
Bitten, and then there was
What's his
there was
name?
the George. There was the
Nicolas Cage movie, and then there was the one.
Yeah,
with,
which
uh,
you never
No,
could
there's the
tell if
Jim
he was
Carrey
really
one,
a
which is
vampire
Once
or
Bitten.
not.
and then there
Hey,
was George Hamilton.
Oh, Love at First Bite.
Yes, that's the other one.
But
I wanna-
How you going? I have such a headache because he bit that damn drunk, and he's
Yeah,
like
he's friggin-
all over the place. Oh my God, the Gay Blade. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
George
that's-
Hamilton did a string of films that were just fantastic.
Well,
I want to go down the rabbit hole when we get the chance. David, get David in on this.
okay.
The Western / vampire films that we talked about a while ago. This is the perfect time to try and go back and revisit that
Okay.
because
can do
we
that.
never really did a good job on that.
Which one was that? I
That's
obviously
just
wasn't
it. That's
around.
just we talked about a few different ones. And we were trying to
Yes.
find good ones.
We were trying to make our own idea for a vampire film set in the Western time.
Well, I mean, you can't get. You had Billy the Kid versus Dracula. You had. There was another one where it was a sheriff, and he comes home from Civil War and finds out that a vampire had taken over his town and was after his girlfriend, and he wasn't a religious man, and he ends up going to a priest who happens to know all about vampires, and so he makes wooden bullets and cuts crosses into them, and then uses that. And the vampire is a gunslinger, and
Right.
so he's like super fast. Nobody can beat him, and this guy outdraws him and kills him in the end by shooting him in the heart with a wooden bullet with a blessed crucifix carved into the tips of his bullets, which was different than Billy the Kid because John Carradine was the older one, the father, right? Because there was David Carradine and there was the other Carradine. He played
older
Dracula, but he was in this flamboyant, because John Carradine was really skinny and tall, so he was in this flamboyant upper Englishman with a top hat, and he moved from England to and he bought up this property in this Western town and was going to take over and everything. And yeah, so those were my two first experiences into Western vampires. And I saw them after the fact because they were from the 30s and the 40s and 50s.
So
For me, it was Vampires Los Muertos. That's about as close as you can get. You're going to get to modern storytelling with Old West feel versus vampires thing. Like it, yeah, included John Bon Jovi, but overall, it was a good movie.
Vampire John Carpenter's the second John Carpenter vampire movie.
But the one that never got made that I always was curious about, and we talked about this on another episode, was the Ed Wood screenplay, The Ghoul Goes West. Never got made. It was supposed to be, basically Dracula going out west to avoid all of modern civilization because they figured out who he was. And like I'd mentioned previously, I'd even gotten to where I'd spoken to existing members of the family and Ed Wood's former lawyer and stuff like that, trying to track down this script, and it came of no avail. Because the concept of it actually sounded great, even though he was straight cheese and B movie at best.
Well, if you look at Dracula, the first Bela Lugosi film, it wasn't. It was true to vampirism and almost true to the Dracula story, but it was really more about to connect with the audience was here's an aristocrat who drinks the blood of his citizens, his people, to maintain his beauty and thing. So it played on multiple levels depending on who was watching it. But it was a vampire story that had a much deeper, darker political statement in it.
Right.
And a lot of the old Universal movies were just that, you got to give them some credit for some of the stuff they wrote because it was incredibly on point at the time. Frankenstein was great. The whole idea between of the Bride of Frankenstein, here's a guy who got created, he doesn't want to be alive, he has a chance to find a mate, and when he gets the mate, she doesn't want anything to do with him. I mean, that is right now, that is perfect today. And but if you read the part of the novel that was taken from, he actually kills her, the bride, because he rejects her, because she doesn't want him, and he becomes angry and he snaps her freaking head off. And the whole Frankenstein thing was about playing God, and that's because of how society felt. Medicine was. They looked down on science and medicine because they said, we pray God is going to make us better, and here we're like, no, this is science, it can help us, and people rejected it. And that's really what Frankenstein was about.
Right. So and the fact that it came from Mary Shelley, a woman, basically put all the spears and arrows and hammers against it for 100 years.
See, what I really like are the stories that take place around that weekend, because there's so much came out of that weekend with Byron and her husband and the other writers who were all at one party over the weekend at one of their retreats, getting smashed out of their gourd and telling each other ghost stories. And it just was such a fertile playground for the imagination.
That would make a great movie in itself.
Well, Gothic was about that. If you remember the movie Gothic, which told that story.
Okay.
But it was really more driven by Shelley. I mean, her part in it, being the only female at the party.
Yeah.
I would like to see a movie where they take that principle and then have vinaigrette movies in it, one for each one of their stories they told that night.
Kind of like Catch Me Out meets Clue.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I loved about Ghost Story, the original the Ghost Story. That was a novel and then became a movie, which these friends had saw something so horrendous, did something so horrendous, and saw something so scary that after that, every year, on one night a year, they gathered in one room and told each other the most frightening stories possible to try to drive that memory out of their head. And then then what they were trying to drive out came for them. And,
So-
I love that story. I love the movie. The movie's pales in comparison to the book, but they always do anyway.
David, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was gonna say the way I recall Frankenstein though was that the bride was never brought to life. That it was the monster made the bargain with the doctor that if he gave him a bride, then he would leave him alone.
He would,
But
yeah,
it was in the process. But it was in the process of him creating the bride that Frankenstein realized that no, he was about to create some great evil. So he destroyed the bride, and that's what caused the monster to finally go full ape shit and started murder and continued his murdering of Frankenstein.
the Frankenstein's family. Because at first he wanted him,
said, now that you've taken my happiness from me, I'm going to take
Take
all
you-
of it
right.
from you.
but he killed his wife on their wedding night.
Frank,
Because because he
Frankenstein.
because Frankenstein felt he was going to be alone for the rest of his life, and he was angry that he was
Right.
going to be alone. So
Right, but the monster didn't kill his own bride. The
Mm.
doctor did. The doctor destroyed that, and that's what caused the monster to finish his revenge against Frankenstein.
in the book,
That's what I recall. It's been a minute since I've read it, but I'm almost certain.
I'll go
that's the-
back and reread it because I just read it not too long ago.
of all the old classic monsters, I think Frankenstein's my favorite just because the dynamic between the two of them, right? It's not really. They're both monsters in their own way.
Yeah.
In their own right.
I had more sympathy with Prometheus or Adam, whichever one name you want to give him, because Frankenstein was the doctor. He wasn't the name of the monster.
Yeah.
And he was more human than the humans that he
Right.
ran into constantly. And then the whole thing, I always loved the monster just tracked. It turned into Frankenstein wanting his revenge and tracking down the monster while the monster toyed with him to keep bringing him on. And then at the end, he just wore Frankenstein down, and then Frankenstein dies from exposure and everything else and his injuries. And then him sacrificing himself with the, with the fire.
Mhm.
And that's why I love the,
Well, now I think you're getting the movie mixed up.
well, no, I'm trying to think of the what was the name of the movie with Robert De Niro? The that one? That one is as close to the book as possible. Yeah, but I think it was called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because,
Yes.
okay, because that was as close to the book as you get. Because in the book, the monster does talk to the captain of the ship.
Yeah.
And I remember the part where they're trying to break the ice off the ship, trying to figure out whether they were going to take the snow dog, the snow dogs they brought with them and try to flee across the ice. And then that's when they get involved in this whole thing with the Frankenstein and the monster. Now, there have been so many movies. There's been one where they get trapped in an ice cave at the end. One of my other favorites is called Frankenstein Unbound. It's based on a book, and it's about a scientist from our time who creates a weapon. Starts out trying to create something to get rid of garbage. Because Earth is becoming so polluted. And so he figures out a way to just make something disappear. And the military is like, oh, wow, this would be turned into a fantastic weapon. The weapon ends up, what it does is it punches holes in the space-time and the stuff gets sucked. So all our garbage is going to somewhere else in time. Well, he creates time storms and all this, and he gets sucked into the story of Frankenstein. He's Frankenstein from a future where he created a monster trying to better society, and then has to deal with the whole story of Frankenstein. And he's the witness to the entire Frankenstein story told through his eyes, right up to the very end. And in that one, they end up shooting, Frankenstein and the monster end up shooting each other, if I remember right. So there's been a lot of different stories with the different endings, and I might be confusing because I've seen them all. But I have the Hildebrandt artist illustrated book of Frankenstein, which is every other picture, every 2 or 3 pages is a beautiful Hildebrandt painting of his interpretation of where you are in the book. And I read that my Dracula one I gave to I
She
think
who
it
should
went.
not be named.
No, I thought I gave it to. Oh, wait a minute. I gave one to your aunt, and she ruined it by spilling stuff on it, and then gave it back to me. I was like, okay, I'll never give you anything again. And I ended up giving that again to somebody else who went, oh, I don't care. I like it because she spilled red wine or red something all over it, so it looks like blood stains all over the book. And then I had the one that is the Edgar Allan Poe poems that has all of his stories, and that's the only one I think I gave to your sister because she loves the Edgar Allan Poe. But I used to have a bookshelf full of them. And the only one I've got left, I think, is the Frankenstein. And no, I don't even have the Dracula, Fred. I gave that away.
I've seen it a couple times and have.
Oh yeah, back when it used to be nice. But the one thing I loved was the whole gray hair and the big mustache that they had on Dracula that they never did in any of the movies, and the fact that he got younger the more blood he drank, which they didn't do until they did the Keanu Reeves I know how to kill vampires movie, and that he could stay out in the sun a little bit longer. And even that movie had, that whole thing where
that's Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's what it's called.
And the whole thing where she drug him into the keep, that never happens. They kill him right there out there in the front. When Quincy stabs him with the knife in the heart, and Harker cuts his freaking head off. And I was like, man, why can't somebody do that ending? Because nobody ever wants to do that ending.
Because they want to romanticize it, and the funny thing is, you talk about Dracula with that beard and everything. The only time we got that incarnation of him is from Symphony of the Night, Castlevania. When Alucard fights him, and stuff. He has that beard and everything.
And I used to have the preface. Remember the short preface that was taken out of Dracula when they had to edit it down, and it was turned into its own short story.
Yeah.
And it was about Harker when he arrived, and they drop him off before he goes to the castle, and he has to walk because it's dark. We're not going any further. Just got to walk up that hill. And Harker is during the night, it gets cold, and he goes into a cemetery, and he hides in the cemetery, and he hears this singing coming out of a tomb, and it feels warmth, and he sees like a glow, and he thinks there's a candle, and he's like, okay, maybe there's somebody down there. He goes down into the tomb, and it's a female vampire, and she tries to kill him, and he flees, and she chases him to into the graveyard, and a wolf shows up, and he's describing it as the biggest wolf he's ever seen. Its eyes glowed blood red, and these two things fight, and it chases the vampire off. And then Harker feels like he's freezing to death and collapses from hypothermia, and the wolf lays on him and warms him. And then when he wakes up and the sun's coming up, the wolf is gone, so he keeps on walking to meet Dracula. And then in the book, it picks up where he's walking after he gets dumped off, and Dracula shows up in the coach, but pretends to be the coachman, and it's at dusk. And as they're riding, Dracula keeps stopping and stopping. Every time he sees these little puffs of light in the forest, he immediately stops the horse, jumps down, runs, and he grabs the gold from the dead bodies. Those are the spirits, and that's how he was rich. Yep. Man, I read those books over and over again, so they were like, nothing, and then I would go buy my next version of it.
Well, what's great is the audiobook I picked up on Audible had that short story put back into it with the him traveling there, the whole werewolf and everything. I mean, the wolf.
Yeah.
So, which it's another thing I was going to add is like, another film that you got me into, Dad, that was a vampire film was Captain Kronos and the Vampire Hunter. And it's like, it was a really good film, and I wish they would have had more movies connected to it, because it seemed like they were going to make this serial out of him being this
Well,
monster hunter.
it did, yeah, because I believe there was a series of books for Cronus,
Yeah.
but it seemed like they were going to turn him into a movie series, and it never happened.
Mhm.
But I saw those when I was little. They on Project Terror. I just tell you that when I was growing up in San Antonio on Friday nights after the last late movie, this
Mhm.
thing called Project Terror would come on, and it would be a horror movie. And I watched all the Hammer films that they aired, and then I watched The Fearless Vampire Hunters, which was a comedy about this bumbling old vampire hunter and his sidekick going to this castle to save these villagers, and it's a vampire's ball, and they get stuck in this whole thing. Just a ton of vampires, and they're trying to figure out how to get out, and they're more bumbling their way through it than any real vampire slayer. And the vampires just keep knocking them out and throwing them back because they're the big ending of the ball feast for everybody. And except the main vampire's son is gay, and he likes the young vampire hunter, so he keeps trying to hook up with him, while the young vampire keeps trying to hook up with this young girl who used to be a barmaid, daughter of a barkeeper in the village. And so he's chasing her, not knowing that they've already started the process of turning her into a vampire, which means you've got to get bitten 3 times and then partake of the blood of the vampire who bit you. And that way you're a thinking vampire, because if you were completely drained and died, you came back a ghoul or a slave to the master vampire. The only way to be free was to be bit. They play that straight out of Dracula lore, just like flowers and running water and all those things come out of the original story of Dracula. And you got all these elements, but it's played tongue in cheek because these guys are inept to no end, and at the end, there's the biggest chase scene as they ski down the mountain in coffins, and they're racing each other. And Igor's this hunchback dude. He's chasing one of them. The guy is holding the girl, and the professor is driving at the front of the coffin. The main vampire is coming. Igor goes flying off a cliff to his doom. The other vampire hits a tree and dies. And then they get down and they get into the valley. The old vampire's like, we made it. And in the back behind him is the girl, because she's finally turned, and she's ripping the throat out of the young guy. And I was like, man, what happened with this movie? And then next week was Cronus. And I was like, okay, we're going to do a series of vampire movies all week. And so I watched Cronus, Vampire Hunter Slayer. And then there was a Vincent Price movie, which was not about vampires, but it wasn't the witch hunter one. It was about the cursed family where their ancestor killed somebody with their dogs, and then they were cursed that a beast would come and kill each descendant. And then it jumps to almost modern times, and they're being killed, but they find out it's actually a werewolf's curse. It's not a beast. It's one of them that turns into a beast, and it's killing everybody. And in the end, they all die. And I was like, okay, that's 2 movies. This guy's in a month. I don't want to see another movie where everybody dies. So then the next one after that was Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, which I had always been a big fan of. I Am Legend.
Yeah.
And I was like, when he opens the door and his daughter is standing there, freaked me the hell out. I was like, man, that would be horrible to face your own kid who's a vampire.
It's so specifically that, right? Because that's Richard Matheson, right? Was the one who wrote the novel.
They wrote the novel.
One of the best scenes that I think would be a pretty cool short film is the moment where he had just gotten back after his watch died, right? So the vampires were able to get into his garage and kind of mess up some of his system. He's able to fight his way into the front of his house, and the way that they describe it in the novel is that he just blares music to drown out.
He plays his record player to drown out their sounds.
All the vampires are outside calling out to him, right?
They're saying Neville, and then one of his friends that he worked with is one of the main vampire.
Right.
Because they're not just like zombies. They're slightly intelligent. They can use weapons and other things. Yeah. And he's constantly just banging and just screaming out his name, and that bothers Neville.
So he drowns them out with music, and there's a great moment in the book. I don't remember it being in the Vincent Price movie or any of the other iterations, because there's the Vincent Price Last Man on Earth. There's
the Omega Man.
Omega Man.
Omega Man with Charlton Heston, and of course I Am Legend with
And then there were like I Am Legendary, which was the guy who played the Crow was the stand-in for the Crow in the Crow TV series.
Okay.
He's
Mark
the guy
Dacakis.
the guy who hosted Top Chef, not Iron Chef for a while. Yeah, he plays Neville, but it's in modern times, and it's just basically the same story. But instead of being just a average Joe like Neville was, he's a ex-military dude, and so he's got other things to fight the vampires with. It's a horrible sci-fi made movie.
But so the really cool scene was, Neville had just gotten in. He had injured his hand, so he had his hand wrapped up. The music's playing. He goes over. He pours himself a drink. He's trying to, he's just trying to drink some to calm his nerves, all that. And then at some point, he finally just has his mental break. Right? He just finally says, "You know what? Screw it." So he goes and he grabs his pistols, kicks open the front door, and just starts blasting away. And then he realizes, "Oh, I've done messed up." And then he's got to fight his way back to the front door
back
again.
in the front, barricade himself back in.
The way it's described in the book, and that would be such a cool, again, just kind of visual thing to see. If you could do panning shots throughout his house, right, showing the setups, because like his front door had a garlic and a hanging mirror in it, right, that he constantly had. Like you could pan through and just show little hints of stuff going on.
Reflecting it in the mirror would be cool, because he had mirrors everywhere. He had to go get fresh garlic every now and then once it lost its aromatic, and he brought other things too. The one thing that
I always liked the visual of the novel, and I always thought that would be a pretty cool, again, just
they don't ever do the ending from the novel. After he meets the girl, first he gets the dog and he tries to save the dog, and the dog dies. Then he tries to save the girl, and he finds out that they're different breeds of vampire. They're mutants that are just like us. They're learning to eat food again and are more man-like, use machine guns and everything else. Then there are the vampires who still have to drink blood, sleep predominantly during the day. And then there are the ghouls, which is kind of what he was surrounded by. And then, how she tries to warn him, and then they come and take him. And then he doesn't have that run through the city like Vincent Price does. He's shot, he's injured, and he's laying in that hospital room, and they could save him. There are doctors still around, and he won't, because he's like gives in, because he realizes that humanity has moved on, and this is just another version of humanity. And that he was, unless they're calling for him to be killed outside, and they're preparing the stake to burn, that pole to burn him on. And he's towards, I don't know what part it is, but it's within the last chapter towards the end, where he's like, "I'm the monster, I'm the legend, I'm the creature that I hunted." In their eyes, they were humans, and I'm the bad person. And how she's just wants to save him, and she realizes she can't, and she's so afraid of dying that she's just in there with him. I don't remember if she kills herself or she just lays over him, hugging him on the bed. But I was like, I would love that ending. And we didn't even get that in I Am Legend with Will Smith.
No.
Well, we can't think the last of humanity becomes the monster. In a world that.
But see, they combined them all in the Will Smith movie to one creature, instead of making them different parts. There were different types of them, or breeds of them.
Well, they also
it's like every video game we've ever played with vampire type creatures. They always have the ghoul. They have the ones that are slowly turning, and then you have the ones that are embracing their vampirism, run real fast and all that. And then you have the straight up monsters that come out at night you don't want to deal with because nothing kills them. That's one of the reasons a Dying Light, man, I just love that game.
Which is something we'll get into here in a little bit. But, just to wrap up the vampire talk real quick, because as far as that was my thing back then. I loved vampire lore and movies. That was my go-to horror, before like finding out about The Thing and John Carpenter's movies. And I mean, I love Jason. Jason was my thing too, Friday the 13th. But was it Return to Salem's Lot was one of the movies that came out around that
Yeah,
time.
see, that wasn't good at all.
No,
Salem's Lot was decent
No, but
for
I'm
a
going to
TV movie, but man, that Return to Salem's Lot
no,
was
that
horrible.
that was bad. I mean, because that had
And
the
then
did they
what
have
was
the
the other
dude?
one that was like a ripoff of that called something of Sundown? It's where the
Oh, yeah,
vampires had
yeah.
they had created their own blood, fake blood, and they were living a normal society. And then some of the vampires rebelled. We're tired of drinking this shit. Give us
Yeah.
the real thing. And I was like, oh, this is horrible.
Well, they kind of redid that whole thing with what was the movie with Ethan Hawke? I think it was where
Yeah, I was trying to think of that because
That
it was
movie?
very similar. Was
I was
it?
about to say that movie has probably the most hilarious way to cure vampirism of all time.
The Daylight, or what was it
He
called?
gets into the car crash, flies through daylight, just catches on fire,
Yes.
slips into the wall, falls into water. I'm cured, everybody.
I'm cured. Yeah.
It only hurts for the first 15 minutes.
Well, and
Yeah.
then you see Ultraviolet, which took me a while to figure out they were vampires. The first time I watched it, I was like,
Are they
Are they-
vampires?
"Are they vampire? They're freaking vampires!" When you realize they're vampires, you're like, "Well, I would never thought of it that this was a vampire movie."
Yeah. I mean, you have I don't remember this one. This one came out in '88, but My Best Friend's a Vampire.
That was a high
What about-
school. That was kind of
Yeah.
a high school movie where the young kid got bit by the vampire, and yeah.
But this next one is like one of the ones that you love a lot, just because it's a Bram Stoker story, and that's Lair of the White Worm.
Oh, I love Lair of the White Worm. Man, that was such a great movie, and it has two actors that I loved later. Then they were young, and if you didn't know who they were, then you would never have guessed who they'd have grown up to be. It was Garrett Cabaldi, and it was
Hugh Grant.
Hugh Grant,
Yeah.
the main characters. I was like, that. And I saw it when it first came out, so I had no idea who these people were. And then I was sitting there watching Garibaldi in it wasn't what was the zombie movie? World War Z. It wasn't that, but he's in that. It was something else. I was like, that's that dude. That's that dude. So I'm going online and looking it up, and oh my God, it's him. And then the next thing I know, he's getting to be Doctor Who, and I was like in heaven. And then Hugh Grant, man, he got to lay Elizabeth Hurley. What was her name?
Elizabeth
Yeah,
Hurley. Yeah.
Hurley. Was her? Yeah. Any guy who got to sleep with her, man, is okay in my book.
Hugh Grant.
So, one of my favorite vampire movies besides Fright Night, and it's an anime, is Vampire Hunter D.
I prefer Bloodlust over the original. In all fairness,
Really?
like,
Really?
huh?
I mean, the other Bloodlust seemed more like an adventure tale where he had to team up with other hunters. But
No, he
man,
was
vampire.
the other hunters at first.
Or
right?
remember the guys on the bikes, the circular bikes. But in Vampire D, man, that was straight up, almost Castlevania. That was D hunting
Yeah.
vampires for money, and then they never call his dad Dracula, but he's Dracula and all this other.
Mhm.
And it was just visually.
So he's Alucard.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
But-
like the first one's fine and all, and I've read the books, right? The novelization of
Yes.
them are great, or I say they're great. They're young adult. They're translated Japanese young adult novels. So take that for what it's worth, right? But what's funny is that the novels go so much further and have so much more
Oh
interesting
yes.
stuff
They
they
always
want.
do.
Mm-hmm.
But no,
Well, 'cause-
I liked Bloodlust just because there was so much. I don't know. It really, maybe it is because it's more of the adventure side of it, and it is a little bit less to the horror portion. But I liked seeing the different perspectives, right? Of seeing D as this more legendary figure in the eyes of the Marcus brothers and their group, right? And then getting to see like the Barb Roy and all the crazy nonsense that went on with that. or maybe it's just because I'm jaded against old 90s anime. Who knows? But yeah, I just
Well,
Jane,
something
David, you ignorant slut. No, I'm sorry.
so what I'll add though is that Bloodlust is world building.
Yes, because it did seem like they were planning on building a much grander story.
Bigger
Yeah.
story. Right.
I,
Because you
I
got
always
to,
thought there was a sequel coming and they never got one.
well, there technically I think that movie is like book 3.
yes.
There's a story in between the first one and Bloodlust that never got.
But see, D is it's a Western sci-fi vampire
Story,
series,
yeah.
right? Because so none of the books tie to each other. So like the first book is the first movie, right, that everybody saw.
Mhm.
The second book is called Razor of Gales, and he's fighting kind of daywalkers. It's a little weird what he's dealing with in that one. And then yes, the third book is what became Bloodlust, but it's not called that. It has a different name. I forget what that is. But
I
then
have to
what's
look. It's in my room.
I want to say it's like Dreams of something or other. But after that is when it starts getting really interesting, where he comes across a child who's, because one of the big things that they keep hinting at in the books is the fact that Dracula was constantly experimenting, right? He was this brilliant like scientist at a certain point, and he was always experimenting on people, almost like he was trying to figure out a cure for vampirism, right? He was trying to as far as I've read, they haven't really established what exactly he was doing. Mm-hmm. You just know that he was creating things as he went along. And there's this little girl who controls this entire like dreamscape, right? So all these people that come within a range of her get drawn into her dreams, and D gets kind of trapped in this dream world in this village, and he's going around, and at first he doesn't realize what's going on, and eventually he has to try and basically figure out how to fight his way out of this dream. And it's a fantastic, the concepts in D are so cool and interesting that of all the anime series, of all the ideas that are out there, I would love to see them expand that universe so much more, because there's so much interesting stuff you can do in that world.
So right? Did the books come first or the anime?
Yes. Yeah, the manga came first.
The books are first.
Yeah.
And so
I think I have the one they did right after, because I know I got one that came with the set for the special edition I got for Bloodlust, and I believe I have 1 or 2 of the mangas that came out at the time because we got them at the shop. But I never finished them or went anywhere with them because I didn't realize that I thought those came out after the very first manga, and they were just like, they did a cartoon and then now we're going to turn it into a manga series. I didn't realize it was a series of books first.
No, there's 30 or 40 books out there of D. It's a lot. They have written. There's been a lot there's been a lot written in that universe, in that world, and I really wish that they would go back and dive back into that realm, because again, you have this ability where, because all the monsters either existed and came out after the War of Humanity, or they were specifically engineered by the vampires to come about. Like, it's so much of what I love about the Weird West, but then you also have the kind of decrepit sci-fi element to it, and then you have the horror, and you can literally just do almost any genre you want within that world with these characters. And someone with enough imagination could do great things with a series based in that universe, I really think.
See, I never took it as the West. I thought it was like a European version of the West, because we didn't have castles in the West. We didn't have all that stuff.
Well, also it's in the far futures. I mean, it's like 10,000 years in the future. So,
in the future, yeah.
There's no telling how the continents have changed in that period of time. Plus, like, after the war, I think it's like right at. It's funny because it's almost like it's very similar to Fist of the North Star, where there's World War III. There's a big war that happens. And instead of like in Fist of the North Star, you had all these gangs and the martial artists that came out. It was the monsters that came out to take over mankind and the world.
Well, there's been lots of stories where vampires are trying to bring about a war or a permanent darkness. 30 Days of Night, they went somewhere where there's no daylight for 30 days. And there were other ones where they were trying to bring about a nuclear war. Strain was doing something similar like that in the books and in a TV show. But they wanted to bring darkness so they could come out and roam the earth freely. One of my favorite animes is Blood.
That's good.
There was the original movie Blood. I read some of the manga, and then they came out with the series, and the series was really good. That was something I'd like to see somebody redo, with some, a little bit different stories to it. The idea of a engineered vampires and an engineered vampire hunter to kill the other vampires is pretty interesting.
Well, it's also sad because you would technically almost classify Guyver as kind of a horror manga.
Oh yeah, well,
And
it's about
sad.
monsters.
And it's sad that even though they got to I think volume 34 or something like that, it never got finished by the creator, and they could never get the anime to go past a certain point. Even with the second series they did, or second series of the anime, it never finished it. But that's a perfect horror themed story. You got blood and guts and monsters, and people turning into monsters, and it never got the love it should have here in the West, of course, because we had Roger Corman doing the first movie, and then
and Luke Skywalker becoming a cockroach and then fighting a dragon at the end.
That's the sad thing. I mean, I
Well,
don't know if he did it, but I think his production company helped.
It sure felt like a Roger Corman film. Okay, so we've done vampires, we've done Frankenstein, we've done Wolfman. Who have we left off?
Well,
what about the Invisible? Since we're doing classic monsters, this seems like, did you see the remake of the Invisible Man?
Yes.
Which instead of being him taking a liquid that turns him invisible, he's using technology and he's an abusive husband. I was like, okay, I love this. It'd make a great movie. But why'd you call it the Invisible Man? It's just not. I liked Hollow Man. Hollow Man seemed more the Invisible Man to me than that, because Hollow Man's about a guy he's already kind of on the edge of becoming an abusive person. He's egotistical, and then he gains the ability to hide, and then you see him experimenting, going into people's houses and messing with girls, and he just realizes, I'm all powerful. There's nothing they can do to stop me.
Humanity, yeah.
And they never played up on the fact that was the Invisible Man. It was, just a modernized, just like Independence Day was War of the Worlds.
Mm.
I mean, they kill it with a virus, which is how the aliens die in War of the Worlds, because of, they come and start eating our food and eating humans and absorb and digest the microbes we have, and their body isn't built for it, and they die. Everything in that movie was War of the Worlds, just told with a modern take. Well, that's the same way Hollow Man was for Invisible Man.
We all know just liked it because Kevin Bacon's junk, but I really liked.
Okay, I don't remember that, but I'm so happy that you did. I remember the great effects of him dissolving and us seeing his layers disappear.
Yeah.
And just like when I went and saw David, we got to talk, man. What's the other one that Chevy Chase did?
Memoirs of Invisible Man.
Invisible Man. When he is drinking,
which is John Carpenter, yes.
And when he was drinking and eating, okay, just because you're invisible doesn't mean what you ingest is going to be invisible. And so it's going down, and then I was like, dude, man, you're walking around with this, and it just looks like a bow walking as you're food processes through your intestines and breaks down, and then you're just going to see this compacted shit waiting to fall on the ground. What the hell is that? And then the fact that he had to deal with going mad because his eyes are invisible even to him. He has no eyelids. Can you imagine if somebody cut your eyelids off and all you can do is see? You can't shut your brain down. You can't do anything. How would you sleep?
Yeah.
Unless you're me when I was younger. Oh, he's asleep. Remember, I used to do that, Dad.
You slept with your eyes open.
Yes.
I know. Yeah, I'm sad to talk to him for 10 minutes. And I look over at him and he's like,
That was some creepy
and
shit.
what do you think? What do you think about that? Logan. I mean, Logan did it too. Vince, what? You're freaking asleep. What was the last thing you heard? And it would be the first thing I was talking about. Did I just bore you to death and that's what put you to sleep? And I remember at times when his mom would come in and we'd be watching something and she'd go, he's asleep, go put him to bed. And I'd look at him, his eyes are open, he's watching. Aren't you watching? Maybe, oh, damn it. Go carry him to put him to bed because he was asleep.
That was some creepy
So-
shit.
So
Man.
an underrated version of the Invisible Man, I think, was actually the sci-fi TV series.
Yes,
that ran.
there
I
it is.
love that
Yes.
series.
Dude, that series was great, and the fact that they gave it was the gland, right, that they
Yeah.
implanted in,
Playing
so
it,
he
yeah.
The
Sasquatch
mercurial
gland.
shit in
turn it
there.
on and off,
Yeah.
right? And
Quicksilver.
yes, the Quicksilver gland. And man, that was such a cool concept of a series. I need to go back and watch it. It's been forever since I've seen that show.
I'm trying to remember. Wasn't what's his name from Man from Uncle in that? Playing the professor trying to help him? Or was that a different movie where they made a guy become a spy who could turn invisible and he could turn it on and off? I think that's the same one. And I can't remember what his name is, but he played the Russian dude in Man from Uncle.
Oh man, it's been so long since
No
I've seen that.
kidding.
And
But yeah, I was going to bring that up too, David. That was a great series. Lasted
Yeah.
what, maybe 2.5, 3 seasons?
it was
No,
two.
you know, and the one thing that nobody ever talks about is sci-fi. When it first started, the series that they made were fantastic.
The good
Yeah,
stuff.
they
mean,
had it.
My
Not
favorite was
Sharknado.
Friday the 13th. No, I'm talking. This is long before that.
I know. We gotta
Friday the
clarify that,
13th,
though.
the series, which was about cursed objects. Great take on Friday the 13th, which was just being overdone in the films. You had War of the Worlds, which was a direct sequel to the George Powell movie. And the whole first season was directly the consequences of what we did with the aliens that were left, and that we hid their bodies, and then that some of them weren't dead and were hiding. And then when they decided they'd had enough to taking over enough people, because they had found a way to take over people's bodies, kind of borrowing from invaders. And then when the first season ends, we're at the verge of an apocalypse, and then when the second season happens, the apocalypse has happened, and it's mankind fighting a resistance from the invaders. And it was one of the few series that knew it was going to end, so they actually finished. They defeated the aliens for good, and they had a final episode that ended it all. Man, I was like, wow, you don't get that kind of closure on television shows a lot. You know, once they're canceled, they don't get to go and end it. You know, it's over. And they did that. What were some other series from that period that sci-fi did? Because they had a ton of
Well, there was
First Wave, which was the
all about
alien invasion.
Nostradamus books with the guy who's the second blessed man, having to stop the alien invasion.
I keep wanting to say the Crow series, not the Crow. Yeah, no, Crow was on 20. So no, Crow was a Fox, I think. And where did the Highlander series start? That wasn't sci-fi, was it?
NBC or
No, it was not on one of the main networks. None of those shows ever made it. They were on like one of the others, like UPN and whatever channel 39 used to be. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. 39
Look at
was local for a long time, and then they got picked up by some kind of
Yeah, I'm looking it up right
semi-national.
now.
They were the syndicated television stations, where during the day they would show a lot of reruns of old shows, and then in the
Yeah.
evening they would broadcast brand new made for television series.
Because 26 and 39 was where we used to watch all the Kung Fu theater stuff.
Yeah. And then they had one of them, 26, I believe, had the Saturday night horror thing with the radio guy from Houston, and he would show 3 movies back to back to back. Because remember, there was the one movie we were all watching, and it was the I don't think it was Black Sabbath, because Black Sabbath is the one with Boris Karloff, but there was another one that was very similar, and it was about a woman who was killed as a witch, and they hammered a face onto her it was like a Iron Maiden, and they hammered it. It had spikes on it, and then she gets resurrected by accident, and then she's trying to possess one of the girls. And what is it?
It was a Paul Naschy film. I think I know the one you're talking about. It was a Spanish film.
It had one of the ladies who's always in the horror movies back then. She had the black hair.
That helps.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I meant she was Elvira before Elvira.
I swear.
Oh my God.
I actually believe she was in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yes.
Oh, I know you're talking about. What's his name? Brandon talked about.
Oh, come on.
That episode.
She's in a couple of the Ed Wood movies, and I can't.
But in it, she's like, they do to her somebody else. They do to her, somebody else. She has one of her minions hammer the same type of face on somebody else, and then resurrects him as her minion. And when they pull it off, Mike was all freaking out because of the holes in him and the blood dripping. I said, "No, what's the matter, Mike? He's a holy guy. He's not scary." And everybody was like, Sound like a room full of zombies moaning.
David had to run on that note.
Vampira.
Hold on. No, because I have this collection of old Paul Naschy movies, and I want to say it's Horror Rises from the Tomb.
I have to look at it. I could bring it up.
Because I swear, because I remembered I started watching these movies, and your description right there, yeah, it starts off, and it's some people that are it's Paul Naschy is the villain, is one of the villains, and it's like his wife, and yeah, they put some kind of mask and hammer it onto their head, but then like the body shoots off into space or some weird nonsense. It was one of the coolest and weirdest openings to a horror movie I'd seen in a while, but I swear that's what it was.
Yeah, well, that's what this guy, what was his name? The guy, the DJ. He actually interviewed Anna's grandfather back in the day. He went to Roy's Memory Shop and had an interview with him and stuff. He was a big DJ in Houston. And he would pull some of these old movies out of, I don't know what vault he kept them in, but there was stuff I'd never seen, and I thought I'd seen a ton, almost all the horror movies. Because
was he the one that was on when 101 was a rock station?
No, he wasn't. He wasn't from 101. He was
okay.
he was from I believe he was from the oldies station that we used to have in Houston.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember his name.
See, I have images and I remember things. When it comes to names, forget it, because I can't remember names anymore. I have a picture of him because he was at a con I went to when I was really young, and he was interviewing people for the radio station. He was kind of balding at the top. He had kind of wavy hair on the side, and he had a mustache.
Paul Naschy certainly loved vampire movies, though, didn't he?
He was more of a werewolf man, but yeah. He was mainly known for a werewolf character that he played that was. It's funny because Paul, I wish that they would do a full collection of all his his werewolf movies, because he's kind of like the Spanish Zatoichi, where he's this wandering werewolf who just kind of like comes into towns and he's always searching for a cure, right? So he goes into this town and there's always someone there who claims that, oh, if you go do this, this, and this, it'll cure your, werewolfism, but it never does. And so then he just moves on to the next town of it. And there was a whole series of movies about that. What's funny is how I first discovered this guy before Scream Factory came out with the 2 collections of movies they had.
Right.
There was one. It was called. Oh, now I'm.
I have Exorcismo.
There's one that he was an overall filmmaker, and he ended up convincing, I think, the government of Japan to let him go there and shoot a documentary about some historical deal going on with Japan.
Oh, El Ultimo Kamikaze.
I have no idea if that's what it is, but he. At the same time, he got them to allow him to shoot a bunch of footage for one of his werewolf movies in Japan, and it's actually one of the longer ones that he does, and it is hilarious. Like he's in an open air bath, like hot springs bath, right? And then out of nowhere, just ninjas, right? Just it's Japan, right? So
Gotta have ninjas.
Ninjas just show up and start attacking him in the middle of and it is hilarious. It's fantastic, man. In terms of B movies, God, we're all bad with names tonight.
Would that be Howl of the Devil?
Huh?
Would that be Howl of the Devil?
No,
Yeah.
that one's, I think, in the series, but
From what I'm,
it's like
Lycanthropus, the Full Moon Murderer. Or no, that's later. That's later.
Hold on.
Here, Dad. From what it looks like, CBS. Looks like it ran on CBS.
Which one did?
Highlander.
On CBS?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, at least that's what Wikipedia is saying. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I
I'll
can't
have
find
to
anything
look
on it.
Because there was like Werewolf, which was a great series.
Yes, it was.
With Chuck Connors playing one of the master werewolves and the young man trying to figure out. And I loved the lore in that was because it fell back to the old Lon Chaney, where even a man pure of heart can become a wolf when the wolf bane blooms and the mark of the beast and all that stuff. But in it, he's trying to figure out how to cure himself. And they tell him, you got to go kill the werewolf who turned you. And then that relieves everybody underneath him and cures him. And then he goes and he hunts for like 2 seasons, and the 3rd season he kills the Chuck Connors character, who is the main werewolf. And then he finds out that somebody turned him, and you got to go kill that one to do it. And I was like, oh man, this series is never going to end. And it didn't, because
go ahead.
How do you go back and chase that down?
Yeah.
Because Chuck Connors had been in the series, he'd been around a long time. He was like an old sailor. And so I loved the werewolf series.
Remember, although they had the pentagrams on the hands.
Pentagram on the hand, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite werewolf movie besides Van Helsing, which I believe the werewolves in that are gorgeous. CGI, but they're still gorgeous.
Dog Soldiers?
Dog Soldiers was good, but man, for a total different reason.
David.
The sausages coming out for the guts, man. But no, there was a movie with Oliver Reed called Curse of the Werewolf. And he was a blonde werewolf. And he was a good guy. Just like Lon Chaney's, something Talbot. I can't remember what his name. The character is Lawrence Talbot. So you kind of really feel for him. And every time he thinks he's going to get close to finding a cure or being able to do something, in the end, it's always somebody screws it up for him. And at the end, the village turns on him and he turns into a werewolf and ends up getting killed. And I was like, I'd like to see one movie where the werewolf, somebody is able to save the werewolf. And I think they did it with the first Werewolf in London. And then there was one movie where it was supposed to be a werewolf attacking somebody, and it was taking place it was a period piece that took place in England, but it was in color. And I don't remember if it was a Hammer film, and it's not a werewolf at all. it's a rich woman who it's a woman who was a butler. Her and her husband were a butler for this family, and they were supposed to be left in the will, and everything got left to the children. So they decide to make it look like a werewolf is killing them, and it was very Hound of the Baskerville-esque, like they borrowed from that Sherlock Holmes story.
You're talking about Brotherhood of the Wolf, right? Or no?
I haven't
that's
brought
another
up
movie.
Brotherhood now. Brotherhood,
But that's another
Wolf
movie that we
was-
thought that there was going to be a giant monster in it, and it turned out to be just it was an abused.
It was a hyena, because the
Yeah.
guy had brought a hyena back from Africa on one of his travels, and he abused it. He brought it as a puppy, and he overfed it, and then he abused it, and he added like spikes onto it, and it
Yeah.
grew into its flesh. And then in the end, he'd starve it for weeks on end and then release it. It would kill whatever the first person it came with. But he always made sure it was at the target he wanted it to go to. Yeah, that was the first movies that I was like, okay, I'll sit through the subtitle on it.
Me and you did. It was, remember, we're all hyped for this trailer. We're gonna go watch this movie, and then me and you sit down. I think Ember was there, Mark was there, I think Josh was there, Mark's brother Josh, and we're all sitting there, and the subtitles come. Mark's all like, I ain't doing this. No.
Didn't he leave? He walked out.
He left, and then I think Ember left with him. She didn't watch the movie all the way through, I don't think.
I was like,
It was
I
just
think
me
this
and
is
you
going to be
sitting there.
good. I'll suffer through it. And because there was some movies that it was going by so fast, I was like, F this, and I'd go get my money back. But it was actually really good. The spacing was you could read what was being said without, okay, I'm concentrating on the lettering and I'm not paying attention what's going on the screen. Now that I've got to read it, what the hell just happened? Oh, it's going to another scene. No, it's just well done.
Yeah.
For when we went and saw it. And then, of course, there was the other one, which was the take of Little Red Riding and A Company of Wolves.
Company of Wolves,
which was the Little Red Riding Hood story. And the thing that movie was made, I believe, by the same production company who did the two Waxworks movies.
I think they did.
Because the effects were very similar. But in that, instead of you becoming a werewolf,
the wolf came out of you.
The wolf came out of you, and it would start growing out of your mouth, and your skin would just peel off of it, and then you'd be a wolf. And then when you change back into a human, the same thing happened. The werewolf parts, you just peel them off and yank them off, and then it's just gory. Both effects were super gory.
So remember, there's also another werewolf movie that we haven't talked about, which is a Stephen King short story,
Silver Bullet.
Silver Bullet. Back when Gary Busey was not crazy. He was an awesome.
I don't believe that time exists.
Oh, this was before he used his head as a battering ram on concrete.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This was before the first motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
So
it was about the same time he did the Buddy Holly story, that kind of period when he was like Lethal Weapon, when he was
Lethal Weapon,
almost coherent.
Joshua, yeah. But yeah, no, that was a good movie too. I mean, it was a good adaptation. I mean, I don't know how close it was, but it was a good film.
Yeah, the short story was really a smaller story. That kind of had to get blown out to make it into a more of a viable film.
Right.
But the elements were there, the priest being the werewolf and all that, and then Halloween night, and the uncle being more hip than most people would have been at his age, actually going and getting a silver bullet for the gun just to make his nephew happy, but then realizing something was up. And yeah, I mean, I love the movie.
Well, it reminded me of it was like a movie about, I mean, it would be me and you, or it would be me and Uncle Gene. It was like I could see the similarities.
Gary Busey reminded me more of your Uncle Roger.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Uncle Gene, yeah. I would pity the werewolf come out Uncle Roger. I'd be like the giant,
just like
the Jolly Green Giant taking on something. I mean, both my brothers. My brother could Terry could palm a basketball with his hand, and then cover half the circumference of the basketball and just get it. And he'd walk up and go, take it from me. And you'd be like, trying to pull it. And he'd just be doing his hand. All right, come on. You ain't trying. Come on, come on, come on. And he'd yank it out of your hand. And you go, damn it. And then Roger would just burst the basketball. And he had these big gorilla hands, man. He was huge.
He had to walk through, he had to go like duck his head.
He always, when he came, the first time he came into my apartment, he was like, and the kids were like,
yeah.
And your sister just running up and grabbing him by
His
the
leg.
knee. She was in love with him. Can I keep him? You're gonna have to keep him in beer.
Oh man, that's a whole other story. We need to talk about all that with him. We need to talk about this whole journey of like Colin staying with us, Roger staying with us, Gene staying with us.
Well, here,
Mike.
I got a story that involves my brother and involves something scary. I already explained to you guys, I watched a thing called Project Terror. On Saturday nights, they had a thing called The Hand of Fright. And it starts off after the TV goes through its shutdown and it plays that big, beautiful, patriotic thing. And it used to come on NBC on Channel 4 in San Antonio. And it would go, has ended its broadcast night. Good night. And then your TV would get real quiet and it'd go, and it'd be that white static horrible noise, and you'd race to the TV to turn it off. I always scared the shit out of me to wake up to that thing going on. And then, but if you waited and you counted to like about 10 minutes after the hour, all of a sudden your TV would go and this picture would pop up, and it was a cemetery. And there's this fog moving over the grounds, and it'd be a cross and all these tombstones and everything. And you'd see this mausoleum, and you'd see this rat come running across the graves and everything. And all of a sudden his hand comes out of the ground, grabs the rat and pulls it down. And you hear it as it's being screamed under. And it would go, Hand of Fright, tonight's horrifying, terrifying story is. And that's the first thing I ever watched Gamera on. And it was because the broadcast channel had went off the air, but then a local channel took it over and did a late night horror movie. And so I was watching a movie about these invaders from another planet that were invisible. And you'd see them walking. You'd see the footsteps imprinting into the ground. Well, what they did was they went to cemeteries and they'd resurrect the dead. And they use them as their warriors. And so the guy who was working for like one of the scientific agencies, they're trying to figure out what happened. One of the rocket tests went wrong, and they start receiving this broadcast signal, and they're trying to figure it out. And they get one of the husbands of one of his friends gets killed, and then comes back and tries to kill his wife. And he's one of those things. And they just happen to show up, him and his girlfriend, and they wrestle with him. And as they fight, he falls and he hits his head, and there's no blood. He gets gashed, but there's no blood. And they figure out that they're aliens possessing their bodies, and they start talking it through people through telepathy, telling them that they're here, they're going to take over the world, and that mankind is trying to branch out into space, and it needs to be stopped in its tracks. And they figure out how to use this sound weapon they create that solidifies their bodies into this lump of goo. So every time they're like a zombie coming at them, they go, whoa, and all of a sudden you see this little pile of smoking goo. Well, there's a scene where this woman is sitting on a chair, and she's by a window. No, she's got her back to a door. And you see this arm come out, slowly reaching for the back of her neck. Well, my brother Roger has come home, and he's just plastered. And he climbs over the fence, and he's trying to sneak in to the back way, so my dad doesn't know that he's come home late and he's drunk. So he walks by my window. He's do 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 do, and he just sees me sitting on my bed and with a blanket, just watching this movie. And my window's open because it was hot this summer, and so he starts reaching through the window and he's timing it for when the hand's going to grab this woman. And it's just like at the same time, and I just catch a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. Just as he puts his hand on my shoulder, the woman gets and she screams. And I grab the bat that I told you I used to keep beside me and under my bed. And I turn around, I was, da, 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 da. And he's screaming bloody murder because I'm just hitting his arm. Like, and he's like, stop hitting me. Ah, it hurts, it hurts. And he's like, give me the bat. And I'm like, Roger? He goes, who the hell do you think it is? He goes, what the hell are you attacking me with a bat? What the hell are you sticking your hand in a window for? He's like, and my dad's like, what's going on in there? And he's like, I'm just talking to the boys. He goes, well, y'all gotta shut up and go to bed. It's late. All right. And so my brother's like, you want to go get a root beer? And they used to have a place where they sold frosty root beers. And I was like, yeah. And so he goes, come on. And he helps me out the window. We climb over the fence, go get in his car, and we go get Frosties. And then we drive back and we're walking. And he's like, well, I think I'm going to go over to my friend's house. He goes, how you can get back in? I said, well, you're going to have to help me climb in the window. And he goes, all right. So he helps me climb back through the window, and I hear him fall over the fence going out. I don't know how he made it in twice without busting his behind, but he falls. He's like, son of a bitch. Sorry, you can edit that out. And you hear him he tromps off to the car, and I hear him peel out and down the street because he had a Mustang too. And I was like, yeah, that's inconspicuous, Roger. Yeah, that's the way to go. And I finished my root beer, and then I crashed. The movie's over by the time we got back anyway. And so I'm laying there, and in the morning, my brothers are like waking me up, like, where'd you get the root beer? And I'm like, what? They go, where'd you get the root beer? I said, I didn't have any root beer. You're a liar. You snuck out. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And they point at the root beer bottle, which is sitting at the side of my bed. I said, oh, I went out with Roger last night. And then they get mad at me because I didn't wake them up or bring them anything. So they're like, we're going to go tell Dad. And I'm like, you're not going to tell Dad. And they're like, Dad, that kind of quiet call, like and I'm like, I'll buy y'all a root beer. All right. And then so later that day, we walked down to Stitches and we got little bottles of root beer. But I was like, that was so fun. I never knew what was that Roger was going to pull. Like one night he showed up and he was like, what are y'all doing? I said, well, Mom and Dad are out and we're supposed to stay in. No, hell with that. Let's go see King Kong. So he drove us to King Kong, or we'd go see Jaws. He took us to see Jaws. Now y'all don't tell you folks about this. I don't want to get in trouble for it. But that was your Uncle Roger, man.
I miss him. I miss him terribly.
I remember one time some boys had picked on me, and then I fussed at them back. I said, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to get my big brother. And they'd all seen him in the neighborhood. And they were like, you aren't going to go. Oh, the hell I won't. I'll get him. He'll stomp y'all in the mud. And they would like, leave me alone. Well, one of them came back and told my mom that I picked on them and was going to sick my big brother. And Roger was like, did you do that? I said, no, they were picking on me. And he was like, okay, well, let's walk down there.
You see this bruise?
He walks down there and we're like there, and he goes, which ones are they? And I'm like, it's those two over there. They always start troubling. He walks up, y'all picking on my little brother? No, we ain't picking on. We would never do anything like that. And so Roger goes, that's good, because I already told him next time he has to take care of his shit on his own. And he's got to learn to defend and fight for himself. And then Roger turned and walked off, and they're like, snapped, and I was like, Roger, chasing him back home. Why would you tell them that? Because it'll put hair on your chest. No, it'll put bruises on my chest.
Well, which brings me out to a movie that I do want to talk about briefly. Did you get the chance to watch the Black Phone, Dad?
No, not yet. I'm going to have to wait and watch that during the day. I started watching it a little bit at night, and I was like, that's okay. I would have been much more afraid back in the day when we had phones in your home, that landlines.
Yeah.
Then, because now I've just got a cell phone, and if that goes, if I ignore it. But it was really kind of hard to ignore the house phones because they rang so loud. And that just there were certain scenes that were just took me back, and I was
Yeah.
like, I gotta watch this during the day. I can't watch this and go to sleep. I'll be up all night.
And it was just this. It reminded me of Ember, the sister, but there's moments in that movie that I do want to discuss, but we'll talk about that.
No, go ahead. If you want to talk about it, that's fine.
No,
I'm
'cause I
not
don't
one of
think
those
Colin's
guys who
seen it
gets
yet either.
spoiled.
Because it's
I
only
thought
been
he
me and
did.
David.
I've not seen it.
No, it's only
Okay.
me and David who's seen it. So
Well, how about we go and do what David's been waiting for?
No, Hellraiser.
Yeah, I know you've. It's
And let's wrap it up with Hellraiser.
yeah.
So yeah, I watched that this morning, and it's not bad, but I think the buildup was pretty good. I was interested in how they were gonna, because clearly they were changing the way that the lament configuration was going to be functioning in this, right? So
Mhm.
now it's turned into a murder 6 people and you get a magic wish box, right?
oh, okay.
But I feel like by the time we got to the end of the movie, it almost is like the Cenobites weren't nearly as terrifying as the old versions, because there were so many moments. Have y'all who all seen it? Has anybody?
I haven't. I'm not going
I
to
haven't
see
had
it.
a
I
chance to
gave
watch
up
it
on
yet.
Hellraiser after Hellraiser when they went to space. Bloodlines.
I'm
just kinda- after
completely in
that,
the
I was
dark on
done.
it.
Huh?
I'm completely in the dark on it. I've never seen any of them.
Really?
Really?
I know
Not
enough
even
from
the
what
first
you've told
one?
me. None of them.
Man.
Okay, then I'm really speaking to an empty crowd then.
Because
Well,
one
no,
and two.
Well, I
one
haven't had a
and
chance
two
to
are my-
watch it yet, David. I'm going to.
I gotta
plan to.
say, 1 and 2, the originals,
Yeah.
they never got any better than that.
No, and this one's not better than either of those. And I wasn't expecting it to be, right. Like there's no way you're going to top Clive Barker doing his own story,
Yeah.
right? That's
Right.
what the first one was. And there's nothing in here that comes close to the I mean, the most striking scene from the original Hellraiser is when Frank is reconstituting himself out of the floor.
As a blood with the 4, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that scene even today is a fantastic, just as it slowly pieces itself together, and then the skeleton comes up and is screaming as it's coming up out, and then it cuts to the next scene. It's a fantastic little scene, but in this, the Cenobite designs were really good. You get to see a lot more of them. They go away from the
Honey,
BDS.
stop.
They go away
Not
from
you, my cat's trying to get my attention.
That's fine. So they go away from more of the BDSM style to it, and it's more of just grotesque kind of body modification and scarification.
It becomes body horror. And yeah.
Okay.
So like instead of them wearing clothes, it's literally like they just had their skin stripped back, and that's kind of turned into their clothing almost. But it's just again, the whole build up to the first part throughout the beginning of the movie was really good. It's what you kind of expect from Hellraiser, right? Where no one's really sure about the box. There's this whole mystery element to it. There's the horror of the Cenobites kind of coming in and starting to taunt and tease the main character as they're being drawn further and further into everything that's going on. But I just feel like they kind of misuse the Cenobites by the end, and they set up for a sequel because Leviathan, right, the ruler of hell or whatever it is that you want to call it, shows up in this, and it clearly is leading to them wanting to do another one. So overall, it wasn't bad. It doesn't come close to the first two. It's been a while since I've seen the third one. I would say it's probably the third best, because if I remember right, the third one is the one where the lament
of full food.
configuration is not even in it. Instead, it's the weird statue that has Pinhead trapped in it that they feed blood to. If anything, this movie was kind of a conglomeration of Hellraisers 1 through 3, and then they just kind of changed the way the configuration works. But that side of it was real. The different variations to the configuration was pretty cool and interesting, and a neat idea. There were neat ideas scattered throughout this. I just feel like they didn't quite stick the landing the way that they do.
I feel that a lot of these movies today are more, we have some great scenes let's find a way to bridge them. And it's not a story, it's just a way to create something as an excuse to get some great visuals on. Whereas the original Hell story, Clive Barker stories they are really great stories that have this kind of body horror in it. What was the other one that was a real big movie? Nightbreeders.
Yeah, Nightbreed.
Nightbreed. That one I should have had a series of movies, and it didn't. And I just think they drove the Cenobites into the ground. The fact that sometimes anticipation of something is better than seeing it in your face all the time. I think that's part of the problem, bringing us around to She-Hulk again, kind of bookend, that we see her as She-Hulk all the time, whereas before, when they transformed, we always looked forward to the Hulk out. In this, you don't look forward to her becoming Jen again. And she's always the Hulk. So what's the point? And if you can't tell a story any other way without breaking the fourth wall and turning it into some campy thing, then it's not much of a story. So, but one thing I'd like to do in the future, since we're on this kind of vein of like the Hellraisers, there's a lot of movies that were made from H.P. Lovecraft stories.
Well,
and
a lot, but yeah, there's been a few.
Most people think of Lovecraft as Innsmouth, not in the Mouth of Madness, but Cthulhu and those kind of stories. But they're beyond the unnameable. There was a ton of them during the late 70s, early 80s, because one studio or one or two studios were making just tons of movies that were based on Lovecraft. There was even one where Lovecraft is in a library as Jeffrey Combs is playing Lovecraft, and he's reading all these books, and he's reading the Necronomicon, and he's the centerpiece, but the real story are all the interlocking stories he's reading, which then play out for the audience as a mini movie. And then the whole thing is bookended with what happens to Combs. And then there was another one where a lady was a private investigator and she's looking for disappearances, and it had to do with Lovecraftian stuff. So there's a lot of Lovecraftian movies that either are direct adaptations or interpretations or can be alluded to. The Thing is a very Lovecraftian story. Yeah. It's based in paranoia of the communist thing from when the story was originally written, but it has got Lovecraftian elements all over it. And then you've got Dagon, which was a movie about people get shipwrecked, they end up in Innsmouth, and one of them has got to mate with one of the sea creatures. You've got the Dunwich Horror with the Dean Stockwell, the late great Dean Stockwell, which I love as an actor, and there are just so many other stories that would just be great to be told. I am still waiting for Del Toro to get off his ass and do In the Mountains of Madness, and because he said there were two movies that basically told the story, so he doesn't want to retell it. They didn't even come close to that. And then you could branch that off into later on. Like you start off with that, and then you end up with the what is the university called in the stories? The ones who investigate all the paranormals. What is it?
Miskatonic.
Them going off and doing other things. You could do movies based on those and their investigations. I mean, I sat and listened to, there's a series of books which are Lovecraft reading his own work, and you get to see his inflection, his voice in the stories, and then you realize how much Lovecraft and Poe and Robert E. Howard and all these other authors played off of each other, and I just think there's so many great. We're in an era of constant remakes and just poorly written movies when there's stuff screaming out there to be done.
Well,
You
and that's
know?
where like we got the Nick Cage
The colors. Yeah,
Color
and nobody's
option.
ever done that.
Options.
Right. That's the closest to that movie.
Yeah.
But Die Monster Die was the exact same story. The
Right.
Colors from Outer Space, which had
Right.
Boris Karloff and Nick
And
Adams.
what's sad is that Richard Stanley was going to do a trilogy of Lovecraft movies. I forget what were the ones he was going to follow up with, and then he had a bunch of personal issues. I think he had a Me Too allegation that came out and kind of sunk his
His plans. Yeah.
the desire for people to work with him. Right. I mean, he was already kind of known for being a bit of an ass, but yeah, it's like, there's absolutely a lot of more cosmic horror style stories that are out there that could be told. That it's really hard to nail that atmosphere. It seems like people just struggle to really get into the mindset that you need to tell that kind of a story, right? I mean, there's a handful of movies. What is it? One that came out a handful of years ago called The Void. Was pretty good.
Oh, that's the one about the hospital, right? Or the people
Yes.
get trapped in the hospital by that. Yeah. That to me, I don't think of as Lovecrafting as much as I don't think of Lovecraft as demonology, because I don't think that his are demons, they're elder gods, they're beings of science and life and that existed before modern man, before our modern technology.
You still have the cult aspect of it, of drawing them from the outer spaces, right?
Yes.
And pulling them into our universe and spreading them like that, and simply coming into contact with them is mind breaking, right? And drives people insane. All of that. I would love to see a really solid, good interpretation of. I mean, I love the Dunwich Horror. It would be cool to see that done right. What's the story where the Migo show up? Like the man goes, he's
the one who ends up with his brain in the jar.
Yes, like that. Like there's and really, it's almost
and they're trying to tell him, this is the way we can make it where you can travel into space and see all this great things, and they're really just collecting specimens and then using the bodies themselves, because towards the end you find out that the guy he had been talking to had been dead all along, and one of the things were possessing him. And then there was the one where the professor is talking to one of his students, and he got a sample of something, and it was what are the ever-changing things? It's one of the creatures in the Mountains of Madness, but it's a massive one that they run into. But they were the slaves of and that's and they're shape changers. So the whole story revolves around the guy not being who he was, and then the young guy ends up in the end gets blamed for the murder that was never really a murder, and then he's in a mental institution, and then you have the whole what the Zergoth is coming to visit him as him, and he's going to be the next victim that it's going to take over. And I cannot remember what the hell that story was called.
One of the very first Lovecraft stories I ever read actually was kind of sounds like a story that you were talking about earlier, where people are being it was the story we were talking about, where they would come together and they would tell a story, but then the thing that they had seen was still hunting after them, and it was
that was from Ghost Story. Yeah,
right. But so Lovecraft wrote a story, it was called The Hound, and it was about these guys. It's funny how that era of writing, it was all about the extremes of hedonism, right? And kind of what comes from that. So it was these guys.
You mean hedonism, right? Or am I saying it wrong? Hedonism, the wildness,
yes.
Okay.
How did I say it? I don't know. Whatever. However you say it. Yes, hedonism. So they had gone through all the kind of tying it into Hellraiser. They'd gone through all the different they'd experienced everything in life, all the carnal things, all that. They'd murdered people, all that stuff. They'd gotten to the point where they were robbing graves, and one of the graves that they robbed had an artifact that they brought it back, and they were doing dark rituals to it. But then over time, they would start hearing off in the distance the howl of some large
Some
dog.
hound. Yeah.
And then eventually it would catch up to them. And like one of the guys got mauled to death. And so then the other guy was terrified and went to go put the artifact back. But whenever he went and opened up the casket, it was, I think it's not a dog, it's actually a ghoul from Lovecraft. And so whenever he opens it up, he gets attacked right there and gets torn apart. But that would be good. And then one kind of Lovecraftian story that I read a long while ago, I need to reread it because it was fantastic. It was by a guy named John Horner Jacobs. It's called Southern Gods. And it kind of tells the story of this blues. It takes place back in the 50s, 60s. And there's this blues man who's wandering around the South, and his name is Rambling John Hastur, right? So if you know anything about Lovecraft, Hastur immediately triggers you, right? King in Yellow.
Yeah.
So the record companies are finding out that, you know, everyone's clamoring to go hear this guy. So they send this envoy to go try and hunt him down to bring him to a record station so they can record his music. Well, whenever he finally finds him, it's Hastur. So whenever he plays, he drives the people mad.
Yeah.
Murderous frenzy, right? It eventually turns into, there's a cult that's trying, you know, that's being run by Nyarlathotep, who's trying to, you know, bring in some of the old gods. It kind of plays more into some of the stuff that's brought in later, where there are benevolent deities that exist, not just the horrific elder things, right? And so some of that sort of helps in, and it's a really great story. I don't want to really say much more beyond that, but
Because people might want to read it. It sounds like, because there was like two different movies. There was one about a movie that people watched and it drove them mad. And then one time they did a viewing for it and it drove everybody in the theater to kill each other, then go out and commit mass murder. And there was a story about and these were both movies that they did back in the old days. And one was about a record or a song that killed everybody that listened to it.
Oh,
And it was about one guy who was trying to find the record. And so he's doing all these horrible things. I think he commits murder, trying to get possession of it. And because he wants to hear it. And I don't remember what happens for the rest of it. I just remember that much of it.
Well, then there's also, which reminds me of that story from, was it the Twilight Zone? With the, was it the whole neighborhood was trying to kill this guy? Whenever they would go to sleep, they'd almost become like mindless zombies and like,
zombies. Yeah. I almost said the monsters come to Melbury. Oh man, I cannot. M's are hard for me today. Mulberry Street, but that's not it. Because they were all fearing each other because they thought an alien had invaded.
Yeah, no, and this was just like, I guess that either the person had some kind of information or he was like the last or something, because everybody was trying to, because like remember the kid was helping the guy, and then he ended up at the end of it was like the kid succumbed to what was going on, and they ended up, the town killed the person inside the house that the kid was trying to save.
In the there's been remakes of the Twilight Zone over and over. One of the ones was called The Lighthouse, and it was about a doctor who was coming in, passing through this town, and he found out that some people were sick, and he was trying to help them, and the people in the village didn't want his help because they knew it would pass. And once the lighthouse had picked the person who was going to die, and then the beam would just search through, and then when it landed on a house, everybody in the house would die. And he was trying to save this little girl, and he ends up getting her out of harm's way, and it's somebody taking her to the next town over to a hospital. And then he goes back in, and the lighthouse shines a light on the house, and they come in and find him dead. And I was like, yeah, that'd be my luck.
So, and you are talking about books. I'm gonna bring up Stephen King's novel he did not too long ago. What was it? What year did this come out? 2014. It's been a while, but called The Revival. It revolves around a kid that meets a preacher that ends up getting obsessed with like reviving the dead. And each time this person does it, it impacts both their lives. And it goes from him as a kid to a like middle-aged adult until like an older man, or no, it's in between like 3 different time periods. And then you come to find out that there's connection to a lot of Cthulhu mythos in it. But every time it revolves around them trying to bring somebody back. And the guy gets roped into it with this preacher who started the whole mess in the first place.
So kind of to close this off, we start off, we're going to talk about our favorite horror movie or favorite horror novel. So why don't we end it with us telling what our favorite scary novel or movie and how it impacted us real quick. And then we can end this because I know it's getting late.
Yeah. At least late for us when we're recording this, folks. Let you guys go.
Colin's been the quietest. Let him
I
go.
was gonna say, Colin hadn't said anything for a while, so let's let him kick off.
I've been trying to share screen time with you. I'm just gonna go with my favorite horror movies. It's either The Exorcist or Halloween. Just loved both of them as a kid. They both just grabbed me right in the feels and just, I've talked about them both before in the past, so easy peasy.
You got a book to follow it up or no?
I've read the various reissues or the 45th and the 50th anniversary of The Exorcist, where there was stuff that was added back in.
There was stuff that was in that book that wasn't even in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, but the 40th, the anniversary editions kept adding a little bit more, really fleshed it out a little bit more for me. Definitely worth the read. Especially now that Peter Blatty's gone, what's out there is going to be it. So that's about it for me.
Well, for me, it's always going to be The Thing. I mean, it was the movie that really kind of like made me want to be a director. That film still holds up today.
I'm gonna call. You know what on that?
Why?
What movie scared you? This isn't about what movie made you want to be a director.
No, that's
what
not
movie
what that's
did
not
you
what we
watch
said, though.
scare you?
What movie
Or
watched scared
bothered
me?
you the most? Yeah. Or
In
book
the Mouth of Madness.
impacted you the most?
In the Mouth of Madness. Because remember, that was the movie that creeped me out after we went and saw it in the theaters, because that whole Lovecraftian horror, there was no win situation to that. It was the world ended. And being alone, and it follows.
I gotta say something. Did y'all hear a little kid's voice just now?
I've been hearing little kids' voices this whole episode.
It's Colin, because I was
My
like,
phone's been blowing up forever. It's me.
That did not come out of my son. I hear my son talking, but I'm hearing something in the background.
It's my freaking phone.
Okay.
My phone's been blowing up for half the program.
A lot of the reason why In the Mouth of Madness messes with me a lot is because there's similar tones in that movie that relate to my fear. And that is being the last person alive when everybody's dead. And having Sam Neill's character go through that and experiencing it resonates with me. So, as far as a book goes, it's going to have to be, of course, a Stephen King book, and it'd probably be trying to think of it. Because I've been reading a lot of his stuff lately. The stuff I hadn't read back when I was younger.
Will you stop it? You're not getting wet food. I filled up your bowl before we start talking. She's like, "Where's my wet food? I don't want that dry crap." She's starting to scratch my leg. That wouldn't bother me, but she's like, "Where's my wet food?" Go ahead, son. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm trying to think of my book. Go ahead and David, go ahead and go. and I'll come up with it here in a second. I'm trying to.
So, yeah, if we're talking strictly about movies that terrified us, it's hard for me to really pin down a movie that consistently like terrified me, because it's usually not something specific to a movie. It's usually always some component, right, that gets utilized a lot in various films. Like anytime that stuff starts messing with mirrors, right, that always gives me the heebie-jeebies. And a lot of stuff that deals with spirits always creeps me out. But like, I can't say The Exorcist frightened me, but by the time I saw The Exorcist, I was much older, so the effect on me wasn't nearly as much. So I can't really think of films that off the top of my head terrified me. I think I brought up in a previous episode that a lot of my first exposure to horror horror movies specifically was just walking in at very odd points at friends' homes, like going over and seeing the opening of Halloween 2, right, where Loomis is blowing away Michael off the balcony and then going down and he's disappeared.
He's gone.
Yeah. So
gone from here.
So moments like that was more of my experience when it came to horror films. It wasn't until I was older, right? And then by the time I got older, a lot of the monster films, it wasn't scary so much as interesting, right? How the monsters behaved and acted. So it really had to boil down to stories that again dealt with spirits and reflective surfaces and mirrors and stuff like that. Always creep me out. Nothing immediately comes to mind of what played into that I can think of that first really jumped out, right? And I tend to stay away from a lot of those types of movies for that reason. So that's why I tend to focus more on the monster side of it, because and that's one of the things that I really appreciate with Del Toro, and why I wish he would come back to doing more terrifying monster films instead of having relations with fish people, because he takes the time to think through, here's the monster, here's the environment that it's in, and this is how it would look, right? This is how it would behave. This is he talks about how he goes into like types of moss or something might be growing on this side of it because this is where it lays at night, and different, like he really thinks through his creatures, and that's what always kind of attracts me to it. In terms of books, I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as a kid, but like I said earlier, the monster that always stuck with me the monster story that always stuck with me was Frankenstein. Just again, because the interesting dichotomy between the monster and the doctor, and just the decisions and choices and the missteps and the whole relationship between the two of them as it's presented.
The fact that he did what he wanted, and then after he did it, he didn't care about it anymore. Right. Which is a great statement for humanity. We want something till we have it, and then we cast it aside. And then we go looking for the next thing. I always love trying to find humanity in the monsters, because often, and like you said this with Del Toro, his monsters are mostly human. The bad guys are usually the humans in his stories, and he really hasn't done a whole lot of horror movies. Mimic, Cronus was a sympathetic guy, the old man. The one where he produces a lot for other people who do horror movies. But Pan's Labyrinth was a modern fairy tale. It wasn't so scary. But The Orphan or Orphanage, the one about the kids in an orphanage during the war, and the little boy who's haunting the place because one of the people who worked there was killing him and abusing him. And he wasn't a monster. He was just a ghost, but the way he would appear and how the other kids saw him and everything, man, that just blew me away. I mean, it was a disturbing movie. A good movie that's like that bothered me after the movie's over, because then I'm on my own, I'm in my own head, and I'm playing it through. And then often I'm in the movie myself. When I watch a movie, I'm always, well, how will I get out of this? Will I survive? And they don't. Well, if I die where they died in the movie, man, it bothers me. I'm like, okay, so what did I miss? How could I have died? So then I start playing it in my head over and over again. And I can get wrapped. You can ask my son, I can get wrapped up in that stuff.
Blair Witch was one of them.
Sometimes I have to write out a whole new story for myself. And it's just me trying to figure out how I would have survived it and what were the clues I looked for and things like that. And I'll pick it to pieces. And then, okay, I'm fine with it. I move on. Yeah, I mean, my first love were the Universal monsters. So you can go ahead and finish. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to walk over you, but yeah, I loved all of them.
No, it's fine. I like what you said, right? And I think that's probably why Frankenstein fits more with me, is because that was one of the first representations of a sympathetic side to the monster, right? Where there was that kind of, the monster wasn't really the monster in that story, right?
No.
It was all misunderstanding, and it was what's the word? It was neglect on the part of the doctor after making his creation, and then misunderstanding from the creation to start with the murders that eventually led to the animus that drove the two of them to their death.
Ultimate death. Yeah.
So that was where that story just always kind of stuck with me, and that's where, again, it just kind of led more to my love of the creature side of these kinds of stories.
You know, I never felt sympathetic towards Dracula. You know, there was nothing sympathetic towards him until they romanticized him. He was pretty friggin' evil.
Yeah.
But the Wolfman, Phantom of the Opera, even though he was a killer, you look at what happened to him. That the Invisible Man, you know, was a scientist and he was berated for his ideas and everything. And once he succeeded, then all of a sudden he's full of himself and he wants revenge. You know, his ego gets in the way. The Creature of the Black Lagoon, I had sympathy for. What are the classic monsters? There's the Wolfman, there's Dracula, there's the Mummy. The Mummy. Up until I read the Anne Rice Mummy story, which is again another romanticization of a monster. But the Brendan Fraser was the first time I really enjoyed the mummies. The Mummy never scared me. Anything that would take for an hour and a half and you had to sit there and wait for it to get to you, to kill you, I wasn't afraid of. Mm-hmm. But then that's the same story behind Jason and Mike Myers. Man, they know they're going to get you. They're not in a hurry to get to you. No. And they're going to sneak up on you and get you when you least expect it. But the Mummy, you know, here he comes bursting through the door and the guy goes, ah.
It's like Austin Powers and the Steamroller.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Stop. And the dude's dust, you know. Get a chainsaw, or you know what? Better than that, grab one of the wrappings and run counterclockwise to him. Because he's not going to catch you, and you just don't wrap him.
The best was, you know, in Monster Squad, when he when they grab the freaking wrapping and put it on the bow, and then the arrow,
they shoot it, yeah,
and he just slowly just ravels apart. But all I can think of is the dad going, "There's a monster in my closet. Oh, scary monster!" And he's not even looking.
Because every parent has experienced that. Yeah. Dad, what? There's something under my bed. Tell it needs to pay rent.
But I will add this real quick, Dad, so you can continue your story. As far as the horror book that I kind of like stuck with me is kind of three of them. After reading Salem's Lot last year, you know, that really kind of got to me, that whole, you know, Barlow coming to that town, just, you know, destroying everything, and then the two characters getting out. But Dreamcatcher and the Dead Zone.
See, Dead Zone didn't get to me. Dreamcatcher got to me a little bit towards the end. And then when you found out that once they get into your head, the stuff that they were doing.
Dead Zone didn't get to me, but it's the fact of like, what if, the possibilities of, you know, had he not succeeded in kind of like ruining Greg Stillson's life, you know,
Now,
and in,
for me, what about it? Because when I
it's a good one.
read it, I was just so excited because it had all my classic monsters in it. I
Mhm.
mean, how bad can a book be when it's got the crawling eye as one of the monsters in in the story, the Wolfman, all the classic creatures that were for me, and that ended up they didn't have any of that in the two new movies. Now the two movies were pretty frightening, especially if you're sitting there watching them by yourself. But
The Cell is another one, would be another good.
yeah, until you got to the end, and
Just
it was
being a
another Stephen King going, "Haha, you write your own ending."
But
Damn
being a
it. So,
dad
okay.
now, it gets to me.
Yeah. Well, I was like that, but I was like, okay, I got to come up with my own ending. The kid comes back to normal, and they go off and live happily ever after. You know, it's just like The Mist. The Mist ended it the same way,
Mhm.
and yet I was like, because I couldn't dwell on the fact that I'm going to have to kill my family to protect them. I've got to kill you to protect you. Man, I can't understand that.
That movie was garbage. That ending was
but-
garbage. But the book was good.
But
But
she was throwing
it's a
up. I
very
was like,
John Carpenter ending. You think about the fact that a lot of John Carpenter's movies end in this open-ended, like, hey, it's up to you to decide how things go. Stephen King did it with a couple of those.
But
movies.
when Stephen King did it, it was in a way of like, well, I'm giving you your choice. If you're a pessimistic person, you can end it however you feel it ended. If you're an optimistic person, they make it out of the hotel, drive across the country, avoiding all the giant monsters. They find that base and they live happily ever after. You know, it's up to you. I can live with that. It's the know when I give up movies that just man, they get to me. And it's not that they scare me, it's just that there's no hope, and I can't stand the idea of there not being any hope. Now,
Okay.
as
So
far
name
as
your two.
my favorite movie, I mean the movie that scared me the most, it's not even a mainstream horror movie. It's a movie about a couple who moved to New England with their kids. They inherit a house, they're broke. They inherit this old house from their family who dies, and they move in. And at the same time, Oliver Reed is a guy who works he's a fisherman. He works with a group of people, and they're drunk all the time and harass and beat people up. They try to rape the wife at one point, and then she fends him off. Well, he gets arrested, and then he breaks out, and he comes to get revenge. Well, that's going on. They keep hearing noises in the attics in the wall. And it comes to find out in the end that one of the daughters of the family that had lived there before was like autistic, not right. So they treated her like an animal and chained her into the attic, and they would feed her through a slat. And no contact with humans. Her whole idea of life was as an animal isolated. And once the food quit coming, she'd eat the animals that came in. So there was dead bird carcasses, there were rat carcasses, a raccoon carcass, whatever she could get her hands on. And at one point, somebody comes in and is looking to do some work on the house, goes up there, and she gets him and kills him. And so the family hasn't figured out what's going on, and then Oliver Reed's character breaks in, and I just remember that she was afraid of bird sounds because there were a lot of seagulls, and it was like her hearing was hyper, so she'd scream and go into a corner, and she just looked like somebody who was covered in hair, dirty face, skin, arms that stuck out of her hair, and legs, and it just looked like she was just all a hairy body. And Oliver Reed breaks in. The fight ensues. They go crashing through one of the walls. She comes out of the wall and starts attacking and kills Oliver Reed's character. And then they're trying to figure out if they're going to kill her. And then the kids are like, no, stop. And then the kids get it to calm down. And then the police show up and an ambulance shows up and everything. And you get the feeling that this girl's going to get the help she always needed. But the thing that terrified me was something living in your wall, something in your house that you have no idea that's there. And there was times that the kids or somebody would be walking and this eye would peek through the smallest of hole, and you feel like you're being watched, but for the life of you don't know. And all I remember is I was watching that movie with my brothers, and both Gene and Mike disappeared halfway through the movie and were in the other room, and I was sitting in the living room by myself, and I was watching it until it got to the good part. They come running back in, and then when it was over, we started flipping all the lights on in the house, and we were just freaked out. And my dad was like, that was one of the times my dad came in. He was like, how am I trying to tell you? Dad, there's somebody watching us. We heard noise outside. Not sure if we heard noise or not. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But we had convinced ourselves that somebody was watching us, and we needed the lights on so we could see, so they would sneak up on us. And he was, he always said, turn the lights off. If they can't see you, you can't see. And I said that before once. That movie didn't really scare me. It scared me, but it was when I went to bed, and it dominated my dreams for like 2 or 3 nights. Constant dreams about that movie. And I was like, man, that really got into my head.
So what's your book?
And my favorite, well, it's not my favorite book, but the book that disturbed me the most, it's a toss-up. There's the only 2 books I've never completed. One is called The Nest, and it's about giant cockroaches that eat people on this island. And it is the most graphic book I had ever, and some of the giant crab books, monster books, were really graphic. This, I kept having to put it down and put it up so I could stomach it. And then I'd take it down, okay, it's got to go up. And your Aunt Lisa would go, why don't you ever just finish that book? And I was like, I can't. And she was like, it can't be that bad. Let me see the book. And then she come out of her room, throws my book across the floor, and she goes, that is garbage. You need to get that out of my apartment right now. And I eventually just gave the book away. It was just too hard to get through because the writer was telling a great story. It got turned into 2 different movies. But the way he graphically described everything that was going on, man, I just couldn't handle it. And the other one was a book about possession. It was about this woman who had been fleeing her family. She was on a bus ride, and she meets up with this kid, and this kid is possessed by the devil, and he decides to make her his bride, and how he haunts her. Even when she gets back on the bus, gets away, goes to her new city, starts reading, this poor kid keeps showing up on the street where she's watching it. She'd be walking and she'll see out of the corner of her eye, and she sees him standing over on the road. She looks over at him and he disappears. Well, he's actually the devil, and he's trying to create the Antichrist. He wants the Antichrist, and he's chosen her as his bride. And man, I just couldn't handle it. I was like, this is too messed up, because he would appear in her dreams. He would, at one point, he was the half goat, all that other stuff, or he'd be this really beautiful, handsome guy, and it was all the stuff that you could, biblical stuff that were there, but done as a horror, because he would kill anybody who got close to her. Like if she wanted to start dating somebody, they'd end up getting killed in the most horrible ways. And just, yeah, I got rid of that one. And I can't even remember what it's called. It's called Loopy or something like that.
All right. I know Colin is ready to go. It is almost 1 o'clock there, or 2.
12:30.
So,
Yeah, because he's an hour ahead of us.
yeah. So, all right. All right, everyone. So it's that time of the episode. We're going to go ahead and give the shout out for this week. And I'm going to give it to my buddy, Ballistic Coffee Boy. So he's a really cool dude. He does a weekly podcast about Atari updates. He plays in different games and everything. He does unboxings. Really cool dude. You should check him out. Until then, have a great one. Hope it's a spooky one. Catch you later.